Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into something a little darker than usual. Or maybe a lot darker. We're peeling back the gilded layers of history to look at the grime underneath. A time of brutal spectacle, of life bought and sold cheaply. We're diving headfirst into what life was really like for a Roman gladiator. But here's the twist. Forget the heroes in shining armor, the champions of the Colosseum you've seen in movies. The truth for most of these men was a world away from that. And honestly, you probably wouldn't have lasted a single day. So, before you get too comfortable, or maybe as you settle in to get uncomfortable with us, take a moment to like the video, and subscribe to the channel. But really, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support means a lot. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining our little late-night history. Alright, good. Now dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan if you have one, for that soft background hum, that gentle white noise. Let's get settled in, and ease into tonight's rather grim journey together. We're not talking about Spartacus tonight, or Flamma the Syrian, who famously refused freedom 4 times. Those guys, they were the rock stars. The one in a million exceptions. The guys whose names got whispered in awe, or even shouted by the crowds. No, tonight we go deeper. Into the shadows, into the stench, the filth, the ever-present, bone-chilling fear. Tonight we're going to explore in detail why it truly, profoundly sucked to be a Roman gladiator, if you weren't famous. And believe me, the vast majority of them, they were nobodies, completely unknown, utterly forgotten, sacrificial lambs to the mob. You see, for every single gladiator who found a tiny sliver of fame, for everyone whose name was chanted by even a small section of the crowd, there were hundreds, more likely thousands, who found only pain, day after relentless day of grinding misery, and almost inevitably, a lonely, often disgusting and very public death. No songs were sung for them, no statues were raised. Their reward, an unmarked patch of dirt outside the city walls, if they were even buried at all. Their stories, they weren't carved into grand stone monuments for emperors to boast about. They weren't celebrated by famous poets looking for a heroic tale. No, their stories were written in blood, their own blood, pinned onto the hot, unforgiving sand of the arena floor. And then, after the show was over and the crowds had gone home still buzzing from the violence, their stories, their very existence were just swept away, discarded, forgotten, like so much worthless garbage. So this isn't going to be a tale of heroism and glory. This is a deep dive, a 2-hour immersion if you'll stick with me, into the daily, soul-crushing reality of their suffering. The constant, terrifying threat of a gruesome public execution thinly disguised as sport, and the brutal truth of what it meant to be considered less than human, a piece of property, a thing to be bought, used up, broken, and then thrown away, all for the bloodthirsty entertainment of the Roman people. From the poorest pleb to the emperor himself, we're going to explore where these poor souls actually came from. And here's a spoiler. Most weren't exactly lining up at the recruitment office, eager to sign on. We'll walk through the hellish, dehumanizing conditions of the gladiator training schools. The Romans called them ludi. Imagine the worst, most brutal prison you can think of. Then cross that with a deadly serious, non-stop military boot camp where the drill instructors actively want to hurt you. That's getting close to a ludus. We'll face the sheer, mind-numbing terror of the arena. Not as a celebrated champion, a star of the show, but as one of the nameless, faceless men shoved out onto the sand, often with faulty second-hand equipment, barely enough training to be a threat, and even less hope of surviving your first few minutes. Just fodder. Human filler before the main event, and we'll look unflinchingly at the grim chances they faced, the overwhelming odds that their only escape from this miserable life would be a painful, public, and utterly unremembered end. This is the story of the 99%, the nobodies, the forgotten, the truly expendable, the men whose lives were often valued less than the exotic animals they were sometimes forced to fight. If you think your current job is tough, if your boss is a bit of a tyrant, just wait until you've spent a week in their worn-out, blood-caked sandals, stepping into their dread. Our journey into this ancient nightmare, it starts right now. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the gladiatorial games themselves. That's a story for another night, perhaps. No, we're going back to your beginning. If you were one of the countless unlucky individuals whose path in life took a very sharp, very brutal turn, straight towards the arena. So, who were these men, these unfortunate souls who ended up as, well, let's be direct about it. They were human sacrifices in a way, entertainment, living, breathing props for the Roman games. They weren't usually brave volunteers eager to test their mettle and find glory. That's another popular myth we can toss onto the funeral pyre right now. The vast majority, the overwhelming majority, they were forced into this life, dragged into it, often literally, kicking and screaming, or they stumbled into it out of the kind of raw, soul-crushing, bottom-of-the-barrel desperation that makes a public violent death somehow look like a grim sort of choice, or perhaps the only terrible choice left on a very short list of terrible options. Alright, let's try to put ourselves in their shoes for a moment, or rather, their bare BL. Eating feet. Imagine this, you are a warrior. Maybe you're from a tribe in Gaul, what we now call France or Belgium. Your people lived in the forests fighting fiercely for your independence. Or perhaps you're a Germanic tribesman, from the dark cold forests beyond the Rhine River, a place Rome always eyed with a mixture of greed and fear. Maybe you were a Thracian from the rugged mountains in the Balkan region. Or a Briton, one of the Celtic peoples from that misty, rebellious island Rome was always struggling to fully conquer. You fought for your home, for your kin, for your gods, for your freedom, your way of life. You probably fought with incredible bravery, fierce courage. But Rome was a different kind of beast, a relentless, disciplined, highly organized war machine. And in the end, your tribe, your people, you lost. Your side was crushed, utterly defeated. The battle is over. The air is thick with the greasy smoke from your burning village. Your home is gone, the scray. Hems of your comrades, your friends, your family. They're fading now, replaced by the harsh, barking Latin commands of Roman soldiers. They are brutally efficient. They are largely unfeeling, or trained to appear so. They are rounding up anyone left alive who might be of use. And that now includes you. In that single terrible moment, your entire world, everything you knew, shatters into a million pieces. You are no longer a warrior, not a soldier of your people. Not in their eyes, not anymore. In their eyes, you are captivus. That's the Latin word for a captive, a prisoner of war. But it meant more than that in practical terms. It meant you were spoils of war. A thing, a piece of property, like a captured shield, a stolen horse, or a sack of grain. Only you're alive for the moment. And that might not be a good thing. What follows is a special kind of organized, bureaucratic hell. You're chained, probably to a long line of other men from your village or other defeated tribes. Men who are just as broken, just as terrified, just as filthy as you. You're prodded with the butt ends of spears if you stumble or slow down, marched for miles, and endless, agonizing miles, under a scorching Mediterranean sun that bakes your skin raw, and boils your brain inside your skull, or through freezing rain and thick, sucking mud that clings to you like a second, icy, miserable skin. Food, if you can even call it that. A handful of coarse, gritty grain once a day. If you're lucky, maybe some scraps the Roman soldiers wouldn't even feed to their dogs. Just enough calories to keep you on your feet, barely, keep you moving towards their market. Water, even scarcer. You might get to drink from muddy puddles when the column halts, or from streams already fouled by thousands of men and animals who marched ahead of you. Disease, it rips through the lines of chained captives like an invisible fire. Dysentery, typhus, fevers that leave you shaking and delirious. Infections, in untreated wounds, festering, smelling of death. The weak, they're not cared for. There's no field hospital for captured enemies. There's no compassion here. They're cut loose from the line, sometimes with a sword thrust if they're slowing things down too much, left by the side of the road to die. Their bodies become a feast for wolves and vultures. A silent, grim warning to those still able to walk. Keep moving or you're next. If you somehow survive this brutal, death-haunted journey, and many, many don't, you end up in a Roman slave market. Now, try to imagine that scene. Burn it into your mind. It's not some orderly shop. It's a bustling, noisy, stinking, chaotic central square. Could be in a small provincial town on the edge of the empire. Could be in a major port city. Could even be Rome itself, the grand capital, built on the backs of slaves just like you. The air is thick with 1,000 overpowering smells. unwashed human bodies, animal dung from the livestock markets, NEA, RBY, fear sweat, cheap wine, rotting food. The noise is a constant, bewildering assault on your ears. Auctioneers bellowing prices in rapid-fire Latin. Buyers haggling loudly, arguing over human flesh. Whips cracking with a terrifying sharpness, a sound that makes you flinch every time. And the sounds of the slaves themselves, some weeping openly, their spirits utterly broken. Some moaning softly in pain or despair. Others staring straight ahead with eyes that have seen too much, eyes that are already dead inside, even though their bodies are still standing. You're shoved onto a raised wooden platform. Sometimes it was a revolving one, so prospective buyers could see every angle. Or maybe you're just lined up in a designated patch of muddy, refuse-strewn ground, stripped naked, or down to a filthy, ragged loincloth. Any tiny shred of dignity you might have clung to. It's gone now, ripped away, stolen. You're poked, prodded, examined like a piece of livestock at a county fair. Potentia. Ill buyers. They walk around you. They stare. They comment. They wrench open your mouth to check your teeth, a common way to guess your age and general health. They feel your muscles pinching and squeezing. They look at your scars. Some might see scars as a sign you're tough and resilient. Others might see them as a defect, a sign of previous damage. They discuss your good points and your flaws right in front of you in a language you might barely understand, as if you can't hear them. As if you're not even there. As if you're a broken amphora, a clay wine jar, or a lame donkey up for sale. There's no humanity here, no respect, no kindness. You are a commodity, a thing to be bought and sold, a resource to be used up, exploited until you break. And if you're reasonably young, if you look strong, if you're well built despite the starvation march, if you still have some flicker of fight, some spark of defiance left in your eyes despite everything they've put you through, you might just catch the attention of a particular type of buyer. A man who watches with cold, calculating, appraising eyes. A man who carries himself with a certain air of, well, not respectability in the usual sense. More like an air of dangerous, profitable, and thoroughly unsavory business. This man is a Lanista. The Lanista was the owner, or sometimes just the manager and supplier of a gladiator school. That school, as we said, was called a ludus. This Lanista, he's not at the slave market looking for a new cook for his fancy villa. He's not looking for a gentle tutor for his children, or a farmhand to plow his fields. He's looking for raw material, for his very specific, very bloody, and often very profitable business. He's looking for men he can break, physically and mentally, men he can train, or rather beat and bully, into some semblance of fighting shape, men he can turn into a spectacle, a public show, and then, when they're deemed ready or ready enough, he'll sell their brief, violent lives to an arena event organizer, an editor as they were known. Or he'll rent them out for the games. For a very tidy profit, your suffering is his income. He pays his silver coins, his denarii, to the slave trader who brought you here. A price is agreed. You are now officially his. Your chains, they're handed over to one of the Lannista's tough-looking assistants, men who often look like retired, battered gladiators themselves, and you're dragged off once more, away from the chaos of the market, this time, to your new home, the ludus, the gladiator school. Your old life, your village, your freedom, your family, they're gone, vanished. Like a dream you can barely recall, a life that belonged to someone else. Your name, the name your mother gave you, it's probably gone too, or it will be soon enough. They'll give you a new one, a fighting name, something short, something that sounds fierce like Ursus Bear or Leo Lion, or something demeaning, a joke name if they think you're particularly pathetic. You're about to be rebranded, processed, stripped of your past identity, and force-fed a new, terrifying, and almost certainly short future. The shock of all this, the psychological trauma, it's almost impossible for us to truly grasp today. From a free warrior, a respected member of your community, to a piece of owned flesh, human cattle, an object, all in the space of a few weeks, or maybe a few agonizing months. The burning shame, the helpless, silent rage that eats at your insides, the bone-deep, chilling despair that settles in your heart like a stone, the utter crushing feeling of being completely, hopelessly powerless. And this, all of this horror, this is just the beginning, the welcome party, the initiation to a world of unending pain, constant fear, and almost certain misery. So we've seen how prisoners of war, Men who fought bravely for their own lands could end up as human merchandise sold off to a Lanista, the owner of a gladiator show. Well, a truly horrific fate. But there was another major pipeline that fed the ever-hungry arenas of Rome. Another route that led directly to a life expectancy measured in weeks, or sometimes just minutes. And that was the Roman justice system itself, or, as some of its victims might have called it, the Roman system of convenient human disposal. Now, perhaps you weren't a foreign warrior captured in battle. Perhaps you were born within the sprawling, mighty borders of the Roman Empire. Maybe you were even a Roman citizen, though likely from the poorer classes, or a provincialis, someone living in one of the many provinces Rome controlled. But you found yourself on the wrong side of Roman law. Or, even more dangerously, you found yourself on the wrong side of someone rich and powerful. Someone with connections. Someone who decided you were a nuisance, an obstacle, or just someone they wanted to make an example of. Roman justice, it could be incredibly swift when it wanted to be. Be ruthlessly efficient. And for many, especially the poor and unconnected, it could be breathtakingly brutal. Forget the idea you might have from modern courtroom dramas. A fair trial for all, a skilled lawyer defending your rights, a jury of your peers. That was a luxury, a privilege that very few in the Roman world could actually afford or expect. If you were poor, if you were insignificant in the grand scheme of the empire, if you had no influential patronus, a wealthy patron or protector, to speak up for you, well, let's just say the scales of justice were often tipped decidedly and heavily against you from the start. Crimes that might earn a wealthy patrician, one of the Roman upper class, a hefty fine, or perhaps a comfortable, if inconvenient, exile to a sunny island villa somewhere in the Mediterranean. Those exact same crimes, or sometimes even much lesser offenses, could get you, the common person, something far, far worse. Serious crimes, of course, often led to a grim sentence. Murder, obvious one. Banditry, robbing people on the roads. Piracy, if you were foolish enough to prey on Roman shipping. Arson, setting fires. Sacrilege, that meant offending the gods in some way, or more often offending the emperor, who was often considered divine, or at least deserving of godlike respect. Damaging his statues, for instance, could be a death sentence. Desertion from the army, that was a big one. Inciting a riot or rebellion, even bigger. All these, and a host of other offenses, could earn you a one-way ticket to the arena, one of the most common sentences for serious criminals who weren't simply crucified or beheaded outright, was this, damnati ad ludos. Now that's a mouthful of Latin, isn't it? Damnati means condemned, and ad ludos means to the games, or more specifically to the gladiator school. So, damnati ad ludos meant you were officially sentenced by a Roman court to become a gladiator. You were condemned to be trained, and then to fight in the arena, usually for a set period, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 if the sentence specified. If, and it's a colossal, almost unbelievable, if you somehow survived all your fights for that entire contract period, maybe, just maybe, you'd be granted your freedom. Or what passed for freedom for an ex-gladiator. The emphasis there, as always when we talk about gladiators getting free, is on maybe. Because Lannistas, the school owners, weren't exactly keen on letting their trained, profit-generating assets just walk away if they could find a loophole. But damnati ad ludos, being condemned to the gladiator school, believe it or not, that was actually one of the better sentences, if you can even use that word, for criminals involving the arena. There were worse fates. Much, much worse. Fates that offered no training, no chance, however slim. Consider this sentence, damnati ad gladium. Damnati, again, means condemned, and ad gladium means to the sword. If this was your sente, NCE, from the judge, you weren't going to a ludus for months of even basic training. There was no illusion of a fighting chance here, no hope of survival. You were going straight to the arena, most likely for those horrifying midday entertainments the Romans called the meridiani. These were the lunchtime shows, often when the wealthier spectators had gone off for their meals, and the crowd was perhaps rougher. You'd be given minimal weaponry. A small, dull dagger, perhaps. Sometimes nothing at all. And you'd be pitted against a fully armed and armored professional gladiator. Or, even more ignominiously, you might just be cut down by an arena attendant, an executioner, with no fight at all. Your death, your public bloody execution, was the spectacle. A brief, brutal human sacrifice to appease the mob's insatiable craving for violence, and to serve as a stark warning to others. And then there was perhaps the most terrifying sentence of all for many: damnati ad bestias, damnati, condemned, ad bestias, to the beasts, to the wild animals. This was a particularly inventive and horrifying form of Roman capital punishment, and a crowd favorite, sickeningly enough. If this was your fate, you'd be thrown into the arena, often tied to a stake, unable to move, or perhaps completely unarmed and defenseless, forced to run fruitlessly from your predators, to face lions, bears, leopards, wild boars, packs of starved savage dogs, whatever exotic and terrifying creatures the arena organizers, the editors, had managed to import at great expense from the farthest, wildest reaches of the empire, from Africa, from Asia, from northern forests. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't a contest of skill or bravery. It was an execution, a gruesome show, dressed up as public entertainment. Your screams, your terror as the animals were released, your mangled, torn-apart remains. That was the point. That was what the crowd came to see. So, for those who were damnati ad ludos, the ones condemni, to the gladiator school, the ones who got the privilege of actual gladiator training, it wasn't much of a reprieve, was it, when you consider the alternatives? But you were still considered the lowest of the low, human refuse, scum of the earth, marked for death, just a slightly slower, more public version of it. The guards in the ludus, the trainers, the doctoras, they wouldn't care about your backstory. They wouldn't care if you claimed you were innocent, framed by a powerful enemy. Many probably did. Few, if any, were believed. You were anoxious. That's Latin for a harmful or criminal person. And your punishment, your path to potential, eventual, highly unlikely redemption, was to bleed, to suffer, to entertain the very society that had condemned you, that had cast you out. The training, if you could call it that for someone so despised, would be just as harsh, if not harsher, than for the prisoners of war. After all, you were already deemed worthless by the state, expendable. The conditions in the ludus would be just as grim, if not worse. Every waking moment, a brutal reminder that society had spat you out. And your only conceivable value now, your only reason for still drawing breath, was in how spectacularly, and how violently, you could die. Another body for the grinder, another soul for the Roman holiday. So, we've seen how you could be dragged into a gladiator school, the ludus, as a prisoner of war, your life stolen from you. We've seen how you could be sentenced there by a Roman court, spat out by society as a criminal, your life already forfeit. Those paths to the arena, they make a grim kind of sense, don't they? You were forced. You had no choice. But now, this is where it gets even more unsettling, even more difficult for our modern minds to really wrap around. Some gladiators, and it wasn't a tiny number, especially in certain periods of Roman history, they actually volunteered. They chose to walk through those grim gates. These men were and by a specific Latin term, octorati. An octoratus was a free man, sometimes even a Roman citizen, though usually from the lower rungs of society, who willingly signed a contract. The Romans called this contract an octoramentum. He signed himself over to a lanista, the owner and operator of a gladiator school. He chose this life, or rather, he chose what he thought this life might offer him. Or perhaps more accurately, he chose it because all his other options were even worse. Why? Why in the name of Jupiter, the king of the Roman gods, or any other god you might care to pray to, would anyone do that? Would anyone willingly choose a life that was almost certainly going to be short, brutal, and filled with pain and degradation? The answer, when you dig down past the surface, almost invariably boils down to one powerful driving force: desperation. A soul-crushing, hope-extinguishing, back-against-the-wall kind of desperation. Crushing debt. That was a huge motivator, a massive one. Roman society, it didn't have the kind of safety nets we have today. No bankruptcy protection for the poor. No welfare state. If you owed money, serious money, and you couldn't pay your creditors, you could lose everything. And I mean everything. Your small farm if you had one. Your tools if you were a craftsman. Your miserable little shack of a home. And worse, much worse, your family could potentially be sold into slavery to cover your debts. Your wife, your children. Imagine facing that. Imagine the shame, the guilt, the sheer terror of it. Faced with that abyss, the prospect of selling yourself to a ludist to a gladiator school might have seemed like the only way out. The only way to get a lump sum of cash, a signing bonus essentially. Money to pay off those crippling debts. Money to save your family from ruin. A terrible sacrifice, yes, but perhaps in their minds a necessary one, a final desperate gamble. Sometimes it wasn't just debt. Sometimes it was ex-soldiers, men who had served their 20 or 25 years in the Roman legions. Men who were trained to fight, conditioned for hardship, used to a life of discipline and violence. But then, they were discharged, and they couldn't adjust to civilian life. The quiet boredom of a small farm, the struggle to find work in a crowded city. They missed the structure, they missed the discipline. Maybe, perversely, they even missed the adrenaline, the constant presence of danger. The camaraderie of men facing death together. And the ludus, the gladiator school, however brutal. It offered a twisted reflection of that old life. Some octorati were social outcasts. Men who felt they had no other place in Roman society. Perhaps they had committed some lesser crime that hadn't landed them in chains, but had ruined their reputation. Perhaps they were just different, unable to fit in. Thrill seekers, maybe a tiny few. Though what kind of thrill they truly expected from this grim business is hard to fathom. And more simply, individuals who felt they had absolutely nothing left to lose. Their lives were already so miserable, so devoid of hope, that the bloody arena seemed, well, no worse. Maybe even a little more exciting than slowly starving to death in some forgotten slum. And yes, a few, a very, very tiny few, might have been drawn by the perverted, glittering allure of fame. The stories of those champion gladiators, the 1% we talked about, they did circulate. The roar of the crowd, the adulation, the mostly imagined wealth, the attention from women, but that was like buying a lottery ticket where the prize was fame, and the price of the ticket was almost certainly your life. A dangerous, seductive mirage in a desert of despair. For every octoratus who dreamed of glory, countless more were just hoping to survive another week. But this wasn't like joining a local sports team, or signing up for a challenging new job with good benefits. This was a total commitment. A sere endure when an octoratus put his name or his mark to that octoramentum, that gladiator contract. He swore an oath, a terrifying, legally binding oath. The Romans called it the sacramentum gladiatorum, the gladiator's sacred vow, and it went something like this. Listen closely to the words and imagine what it would feel like to say them, knowing they were binding. Uri, that means, I will endure to be burned, perhaps by heated irons, if you disobeyed or showed cowardice. Vincere, that means to be bound, to be shackled, chained. For barari, that means to be beaten, by fists, by rods, by whips. Ferocnecari, and that means, and to be killed by the sword, or by any other weapon in the arena. Think about those words. Really let them sink in. You are willingly stating, for a sum of money up front, or the promise of food and shelter, however grim, that you are surrendering your body, completely, your autonomy, your freedom of choice, your very life, to the absolute, unquestionable, and often brutal authority of the lanista, the school owner. You are agreeing to be treated like a slave, even if you were born a free Roman citizen. You are agreeing to be subjected to unimaginable violence, daily, physical torment, psychological abuse, constant degradation, all for that signing bonus, that blood money, and the chance, the slim, fleeting, almost invisible chance to survive your contract. The lanista, he would likely pay off your outstanding debts if that was your reason for signing. He'd give you a portion of the agreed sum of money up front. Enough to make you feel like you'd gained something, even as you sold everything. But the price? The true cost was far higher than any amount of silver. The moment you took that oath, the moment you accepted that money, you became infamous. That's a very important Roman word, infamous. It means you were infamous in the worst possible way. Disgraced, shamed. You lost your civil rights, if you were a citizen. You lost your right to vote, your right to make a will and leave property to your children, your right to testify in a court of law, except under very specific, usually demeaning circumstances. You joined the ranks of other social pariahs in Roman eyes, actors, who were also considered infames because they displayed their bodies publicly, prostitutes, pimps, and convicted criminals. You were, in essence, legally and socially dead, while your body was still breathing. A ghost in your own life. A pariah, even if you survived and somehow won your freedom later. That stain of infamia, it often stuck with you. And the term of service you signed up for, it wasn't just for a few months or a single season of games. It could be years, 3 years, 5 years was common. An eternity, when each day is a brutal struggle for survival. Years of daily beatings, poor food and grinding training. Years with death as your constant leering companion waiting for you in the practic yard or on the sands of the arena. Some choice, huh? It was the choice of a man with his back so far against the wall, he could feel the cold, damp stone through his threadbare tunic. The choice of a man drowning, reaching for any hand, even if that hand was holding a sword aimed at his throat. So you've made it, somehow. Whether you were dragged in chains from a battlefield 1,000 miles away, still smelling of smoke and defeat, or shoved through the gates as a damnatus, a condemned criminal, by Roman guards, your sentence still ringing in your ears. Or perhaps you walked in with a knot of fear and a sliver of misguided hope in your gut as an octoritus, a volunteer who just signed away his life with that terrible oath, the Sacramentum Gladiatorum. However you got here, you are now standing inside the walls of the Ludus, the Gladiator school, and the heavy main gate, it booms shut behind you. A sound like a coffin lid closing, a sound that seals your fate. The air inside, it's different. It probably smells of stale sweat, fear, cheap wine, blood, and animal dung from any beasts kept nearby for training or the arena. It's the smell of a place where men are broken. The sounds are different too. Maybe the distant clang of wooden swords from the practice yard, the shouts of trainers, the doctoras, the low moans of injured men, the clatter of chains. This isn't just a change of scenery. This is a different world. A world built on pain. The first thing that happens, it's all about stripping away who you were. Your old identity, it's worthless here. In fact, it's a liability. If you had a name you cherished, the name your mother called you, forget it. You might be given a new one, a fighting name. Something short, rough, easy for an arena announcer to bellow if you ever get that far. Names like Ursus, that's Latin for bear, or Tigris, tiger, or Ferox, fierce. Or, if the Lanista, the school owner, has a particularly cruel sense of humor or thinks you're utterly pathetic, he might give you a joke name. Something demeaning. Stultus, idiot, perhaps. A name to remind you of your new, lowly status. And your clothes, the rags you arrived in, they're probably taken from you. You might be given a simple loincloth, a rough tunic, the basic uniform of the damned, anything that connected you to your past life. They want it gone. Because your past life doesn't matter anymore. Only your potential future, as a source of profit for the Lanista. Then comes the assessment, the processing. You're not a person now. You're an investment, or a piece of raw material, or just meat. You'll likely be stripped bare again if you weren't already. The Lanista himself, or his chief doctor, his head trainer, will look you over, coldly, clinically, like a butcher inspecting a carcass. They'll check your height, your weight, your muscle development, or lack thereof. They'll examine your scars. Old wounds from battle, they might see that as a sign of toughness or a weakness waiting to reopen. They'll prod you, turn you around. They're looking for potential, any spark of strength, any sign of agility, any hint of the aggression they can nurture and twist. They're trying to decide, what kind of gladiator could this piece of human wreckage become? What weapons might he be suited for? What style of fighting? Or is he even worth the effort of training at all? Is he worth the barley and beans it'll take to feed him? Some new arrivals, the tirones, the absolute beginners, if they're deemed too weak, too old, too sickly, too unpromising from the get-go, they might not even make it to the training yard. They could be relegated immediately to the most menial, back-breaking, soul-destroying tasks within the Ludus, cleaning the latrines, the toilets, hauling water, mucking out the animal pens, if the school-trained bestiary, the animal fighters, or worse, if the Lanista decides you're completely useless to him, he might sell you off cheaply. Per APS to the mines. A sentence that often meant a slow, agonizing death in the darkness, from exhaustion or lung disease, or to some other hellhole where brute labor was needed, and human life was cheap, even cheaper than in the Ludus. But if you pass this initial humiliating inspection, if the Lanista or his doctor sees something in you, a flicker of potential they think they can exploit, a body that looks like it could perhaps endure the horrors to come, a spirit that isn't completely broken yet. They'll work on that later. Then your education, your brutal transformation is about to begin in earnest. You've been accepted into hell. The gates are closed. There's no turning back. Welcome to the Ludus, recruit. Your new normal is misery. So, you've been welcomed into the Ludus, the Gladiator school. You've been given your charming new nickname, your lovely loincloth. You've been poked, prodded, and assessed like a piece of damaged goods at a discount market. And now it's tea. Need to see your room, your new home. Though home is probably the last word you'd ever use to describe this place. And room, well, that's giving it far too much credit. Let's call it what it is, a cell, or maybe more accurately a kennel, a hole, a stone box designed to contain an animal. And that animal is you. Picture this, or rather, try to feel it, smell it, hear it. You're shoved or kicked down a dark, narrow corridor. The stone walls are damp to the touch, cold, slimy in places. The only light might be from a sputtering torch held by a guard cast in wild dancing shadows that make everything look even more menacing. Or maybe there's no light at all, and you're just stumbling in the oppressive darkness guided by shoves and curses. Then a heavy wooden door, or perhaps just a barred gate, groans open. You're pushed inside, and the door slams shut behind you. That sound, that heavy, final thud of wood against stone, or the clang of iron bars, that sound will become one of the most depressing, soul-crushing sounds in your new miserable life. It's the sound of your cage being locked. Now take a look around, if you can even see. If you're lucky, there might be a tiny high-up slit of a window, barred of course. It doesn't let in much light, just enough to show you the grime on the walls, just enough to remind you that there's a world outside that you'll probably never see again as a free man. More likely, there's no window at all, just suffocating darkness, or a gloom so thick you can almost taste it. Space? What space? Are you joking? These cells weren't designed for comfort. They were designed for containment. Maximum bodies in minimum space. You might be crammed in with several other men. Other new arrivals, the Tirones, just as terrified and bewildered as you. Or low-ranking, expendable gladiators who haven't earned any better treatment. There's just enough room to lie down. If everyone curls up tight, if no one thrashes about in their nightmares. Personal space, that's a forgotten luxury. You'll be breathing in each other's fear, each other's sickness. And the smell, oh gods, the smell. It hits you like a physical blow the moment that door opens. It's a complex, suffocating perfume of pure human misery. First, there's the overpowering stench of stale, unwashed sweat, dozens of male bodies packed together. Bodies that work hard, bodies that bleed, bodies that are terrified. Fear has its own particular scent, you know. A sharp, acrid, metallic tang. You'll learn to recognize it very well. In others, and in yourself. Then layer on top of that the reek of urine. Chamber pots, if your cell is even graced with such a luxury, it'll be a simple clay bucket, probably overflowing, or kicked over in the dark during the night. So the floor, whether it's packed earth, rough stone, or rotting wooden planks, it will be saturated with it. The ammonia sting in your nostrils will be a constant, unwelcome companion. It might even make your as water and feces. Let's not get too graphic, but imagine the sanitation arrangements for 100 or more men, most of whom are treated worse than animals. The latrines, if there are any designated ones, would be pits of unimaginable filth, and that stench, it would permeate everything. The walls, your clothes, your skin, your hair. You'll never feel truly clean again. Then add the aroma of damp straw. If you're lucky enough to have straw for bedding, it won't be fresh, clean straw. Oh no, it will be half-rotted, compacted, infested with whatever charming creatures thrive in such damp, dark, filthy conditions. It'll smell like the floor of a neglected barn that hasn't been mucked out in a generation. And underlying it all, a faint, persistent, coppery scent. Old blood. Blood that has soaked into the stone, into the wood, into the very fabric of this wretched place. It never quite washes out. A constant, subtle reminder of the entire purpose of the ludus. The business of bloods. Helit, vermin. They will be your constant, unwelcome cellmates. Your roommates from hell. Rats, big, bold, and utterly unafraid of you, scuttling in the darkness. You'll hear their claws scratching on the stone, their high-pitched squeaking as they fight over scraps of God knows what. Sometimes you might feel them run over you in the night. A truly delightful sensation. Lice, fleas, bedbugs. These tiny vampires will feast on you in your sleep. or what little troubled sleep you can manage to snatch, you'll wake up itching, scratching yourself raw, covered in angry red welts. It's just another small daily misery to add to the ever-growing pile of your suffering. So where do you sleep in this palace? On that pallet of stinking, infested straw if you're lucky enough to have one. And if one of your more aggressive cellmates hasn't already claimed the best patch, more likely, especially for the newest arrivals or the lowest of the low, you'll sleep on the cold, unforgiving stone floor. Oh, the damp, packed earth. A single, rough woolen blanket might be your only protection against the chill. And that blanket, it won't be clean. It will be stiff with grime, probably reeking of the fear and sweat of its previous unfortunate owners. It might weigh as much as a small child from the accumulated filth. It will offer very little protection against the penetrating cold that seeps from the stone walls, especially in winter. A damp, bone-aching cold that settles deep inside you, and never quite leaves. And shackles. Let's not forget the shackles, the lovely iron jewelry. For the new recruits like you, the ones they don't trust yet. For the ones who look like they might cause trouble, or simply for the ones deemed less valuable, the truly expendable ones. Shackles were standard issue. Heavy iron, biting into your wrists, your ankles, rubbing your skin raw until it bleeds. Sometimes you'd be chained to a rusty iron ring set into the wall. Sometimes you might be chained to your cellmates. Imagine that. Tethered to another desperate, terrified, stinking man. His movements dictating yours. His fear amplifying yours. His sickness becoming your sickness. The constant dreary metallic clinking and dragging and rattling of chains. That will be the soundtrack to your nights. A horrible, depressing lullaby of utter despair. Sleep, if you can even call it that, when it finally comes, after hours of staring into the oppressive darkness, listening to the sounds of suffering around you. It will be a brief, troubled, and utterly unrefreshing escape. Your mind will be haunted by nightmares of the training yard, of the whips and rods of the doctoras, the trainers, of the cold, dead eyes of the Lanista, the school owner, by nightmares of the arena, of the deafening roar of the unseen crowd, of the sharp, cold kiss of steel, of your own death, replayed in 100 gruesome ways. You'll wake up, if you even manage to drift off properly, feeling more exhausted, more terrified than when you finally collapsed onto the filthy floor, your heart pounding in your chest like a trapped bird, cold sweat on your skin, every muscle aching, every nerve screaming, ready for another glorious day of hell in the ludus. Privacy, don't make me laugh. That word doesn't exist here. It's a forgotten concept from a life you barely remember. You will eat, you will sleep, or try to. You will relieve yourself. You will exist under the constant, watchful, and usually indifferent or hostile eyes of the guards, or the senior gladiators, the veterani, the veterans who have survived a few fights, some of whom might be tasked by the Lanista with keeping order amongst the lower ranks, and enforcing discipline with their fists or a handy piece of wood. Every moment of your life here is controlled, watched, judged. Every aspect of your existence, dictated by others. You are a cog in a brutal, uncaring machine, a prisoner in every sense of the word. And this cell, this stinking cram, pitted, terrifying, vermin-infested hole in the ground, this is your new home, sweet hell, for however long you manage to survive it. So you've somehow survived another night in your personal slice of hell. Your cell, your stone box, your lice-infested, rat-friendly accommodations. Maybe you got an hour or two of that horrible, nightmare-filled sleep we talked about. Or maybe you just lay there in the suffocating darkness, listening to the sounds of other men suffering, your heart pounding like a drum, waiting for the inevitable. And the inevitable, it always arrives, usually far too soon. Your day in the ludus. It didn't start with a gentle sunrise or the chirping of birds. Oh no, it started before the sun even bothered to drag itself over the horizon. There was no gradually waking up, no stretching, no pleasant few minutes of peace before the day began. Your alarm clock, it was a symphony of brutality. It might be the harsh, deafening clang of a heavy bronze bell struck with furious repetition somewhere in the courtyard. A sound designed to jolt you from even the deepest fear-induced slumber. Or more likely it was the guttural bark of a guard's command, echoing down the dark, damp corridors. Up you maggots, move, on your feet scum. Or even more personally, it could be a swift, sharp kick to your ribs, a boot connecting with your already aching body, A rough calloused hand grabbing your arm or your hair and hauling you violently to your feet. No time for pleasantries here. No good morning, just immediate enforced movement. You'd be herded out of your cells. Like cattle, or worse than cattle. Stiff from the cold, hard floor. Every muscle in your body screaming in protest from the previous day's brutal training, or just from the act of existing in this place. Your joints would ache, your head would throb. You'd still be exhausted, your mind still thick and foggy with sleep or the desperate lack of it. But there was no time for lingering, no option T. Oh, hit a snooze button. Delay, disobedience, even just moving too slowly. That would earn you an instant reminder of where you were. A taste of the whip, a blow from a wooden rod, and you learned that lesson very, very quickly. Or you didn't last long. So you stumble out, into the gray pre-dawn gloom of the ludus courtyard or corridors. The air here is cold, damp, probably still carrying the stench from the latrines, mixed with the smell of fear and wood smoke from a cooking fire somewhere. And the first order of the day? Hygiene. And I use that word with the heaviest possible dose of sarcasm. Because what passed for hygiene for you, the average, non-famous, utterly expendable gladiator? It was a cruel joke, a mockery of cleanliness. Don't picture those grand, luxurious Roman baths you might have seen in movies or history books. Those places with their mosaics, their heated rooms, their massage slabs, their pleasant chatter, those were for Roman citizens, for the wealthy, for the privileged, for them. Not for you. You were infamous. Remember that word? Disgraced. Less than a person. Your comfort, your cleanliness, it wasn't a priority at all. So what did your morning ablutions look like? It might mean a quick, hurried splash of icy cold water from a communal trough. A long stone basin, probably half filled with murky, stagnant water. Water that dozens, maybe hundreds of other equally unwashed men had already used before you that morning. You'd scoop some up in your hands, splash it on your face, maybe try to rub some of the grime off your body. But it wouldn't make you feel clean. Not really. It would just make you feel cold, and probably even more miserable. Sometimes that brief splash was a luxury you didn't even get, if water was scarce or the guards were feeling particularly cruel, while the star gladiators, the champions, the Lannister's prize investments, the ones he paraded before fight promoters, they might get access to slightly better facility, as maybe even a proper bath sometimes, massages with olive oil to soothe their valuable crowd-pleasing muscles. The Lannister, the school owner, he had to protect his prime assets after all. Keep them looking reasonably healthy, keep them marketable. But you, the nameless tyro, the beginner, you, the condemned criminal, you, the desperate volunteer who was now just another number, you were at the absolute bottom of the pecking order. The dregs, the cannon fodder. Your health was secondary, your comfort entirely irrelevant. As long as you could stand and hold a weapon, you were useful. Just about. Remember those famous Roman communal baths we talked about? The public ones, grand structures, yes, marvels of Roman engineering, important social hubs for citizens. But even they weren't always the paragons of cleanliness and hygiene that some modern portrayals suggest. Recent archaeological research, looking at things like ancient sanitation systems and evidence of parasites from Rome and latrines, suggests that these communal baths, with hundreds of people sharing the same water for extended periods, often in warm conditions, could actually be pretty effective breeding grounds for bacteria, for unpleasant skin diseases, for internal parasites. So, even if your ludus had some kind of basic bathing facility you were allowed to use occasionally, it might just be a quick, supervised and probably crowded dip in a pool of other men's accumulated filth and germs. A shared soup of sweat, grime, dead skin, and who knows what else. You might come out feeling a tiny bit cleaner on the surface, or you might come out with a new fungal infection, or a nasty rash, or something even worse brewing inside you. It was a gamble, just like everything else in your life here. And urine, we touched on this before. It was actually a surprisingly valuable commodity in the Roman world. Because of its ammonia content, it was widely used as a cleaning agent, for degreasing wool, for laundry. Don't be surprised if, within the ludus, there were designated pots or collection points for urine. Waste not, want not, especially when it comes to the Lannister's bottom line. The irony would probably be lost on you at the time, as you contributed to the cleaning supplies while living in utter filth. You, stinking and miserable, your bodily fluids being used to perhaps keep some champion's parade armor looking passably clean, or to wash the Lannisters' tunics. The daily humiliations just kept on coming. After this mockery of hygiene, it was usually time for the first meal of the day, if you could even call it a meal. We'll get to the specific delights of the Gladiator diet in our next segment. It deserves its own special focus. But imagine being marched, still half asleep, still aching from head to toe, still stinking from your cell and your bath, to a communal eating area. This wouldn't be a cheerful dining hall. It might be a long, rough-hewn wooden table, scarred and stained from years of use. Or maybe you just sat on the dusty ground of the courtyard. The atmosphere during these meals, it would be tense, oppressive, almost certainly silent. The guards, the trainers, the doctoras, they'd be watching, always watching, their eyes missing nothing. Any transgression, speaking out of turn, not eating fast enough, complaining about the slop you were served, that would be met with swift, brutal punishment. You learn very, very quickly to keep your head down, your mouth shut, except to shovel in the food, and eat as quickly as you could, before someone else tried to take your meager portion, or before the guards decided mealtime was over. The entire morning routine, from the violent wake-up call to the silent, hurried consumption of your morning mush, it was designed to reinforce your powerlessness, your absolute subjugation to the rules and rhythms of the ludus. You were being herded, controlled, conditioned, like an animal in a particularly brutal stockyard. There was no room for individuality, no space for personal preference, no moment for quiet reflection. It was a relentless grind, a system meticulously designed to break your spirit, or what little was left of it, to strip away your humanity layer by painful layer, to turn you into an automaton, a creature of base survival instincts, conditioned to obey without question, conditioned to endure without complaint, conditioned to fight on command, and ultimately conditioned to die without making too much fuss, or at least to die in an entertaining way. The psychological impact of this relentless, demeaning routine, it's hard to overstate. The constant low-grade fear, the endless repetition of unpleasantness, the utter lack of control over your own body, your own time, your own life. It would grind you down. It would wear away at your soul, leaving you feeling empty, hollow, a shell of the person you once were. And the day, the real work of the day, the brutal training, it had barely even begun. This was just the warm-up act for a full day of suffering. Your new normal, every single day, until it ended, one way or another. So, you've been woken by a guard's gentle kick. You've had your, let's call it an invigorating splash of communal, ice-cold, probably dirty water. You've been reminded in no uncertain terms that you are scum. Now it's time to fuel the machine. And by machine, I mean your aching, exhausted, probably already injured body, because that's all you are to the Lannister, the owner of this charming establishment, a biological machine, an investment of flesh, bone, and a whole lot of suffering, and machines, even human ones, need fuel to run. But please do not expect a gourmet experience. Do not even expect something that remotely resembles actual, enjoyable food. What you're about to receive is sustenance, barely, and it's designed to be cheap, and to keep you just alive enough to fight, or die trying. Get used to barley. In fact, become intimately, depressingly familiar with barley. Its texture, its blandness, its remarkable ability to fill your stomach like a lead weight and sit there for hours. You, my friend, are about to become what the Romans sometimes called a hordearius. That's a fancy Latin word that basically means a barley eater. It's not a compliment. It's not a nickname you'd put on your legionary dog tags if you had any. It's a statement of fact. Your primary and often only fuel source, your diet in the ludus, it was predominantly, almost exclusively, vegetarian. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing in itself. Lots of people thrive on vegetarian diets. But this wasn't a carefully planned, nutritionally balanced, health-conscious vegetarian diet. Oh no, this was designed by the Lannister for two main reasons. One, it was cheap. Very, very cheap. Barley and beans cost a lot less than meat. And two, it was designed to build bulk, and to provide slow-release energy. Energy you would desperately, desperately need. And for the brutal, unending, soul-destroying training sessions that made up most of your waking hours. So picture your meal. It doesn't matter if it's breakfast, or lunch, or dinner. The menu didn't vary much, if at all. Variety was a luxury you didn't get. What's in your rough pottery bowl, the one that's probably chipped and stained from 1,000 previous miserable meals? A thick pottage, a kind of heavy, dense porridge or stew, made from barley. Lots and lots of barley, cooked for hours. Sometimes, for a thrilling change of pace, they might throw in some beans, or lentils, maybe some fava beans if the Lannisters' cook was feeling particularly generous that day. Or if there was a surplus at the local market and they were practically giving them away. These ingredients, they would be boiled, for hours, into a grayish, lumpy, thoroughly unappetizing mush. The kind of stuff that sticks to your ribs, yes, but also sticks to the bowl, and probably sticks in your memory as a symbol of why. Our daily suffering. Flavor? Ha, that was a luxury far beyond your station. The Lannister certainly wasn't going to waste good money on expensive herbs and spices just to tantalize your taste buds. Salt, maybe. A coarse, gray, gritty salt if you were lucky. It might even have little bits of dirt in it. Herbs, spices from the far reaches of the Empire. Exotic seasonings. Forget it. You're dreaming. Perhaps, if the cook was in a good mood or just lazy, some garlic or an onion might find its way into the pot, probably thrown in whole, unpeeled. Skin and all. It was fuel, not food, remember that. Designed to be shoveled down quickly, mechanically, to fill your belly, to stop the hunger pangs for a little while. But it would never ever fill that gnawing emptiness inside you. The deep, desperate longing for real food, for flavor, for variety, for comfort, for something that reminded you of a life before this hell. Imagine eating this same bland, gritty, monotonous, joyless mush, day in, day out, 3 times a day, if you got 3 meals. Sometimes it might only be 2, 7 days a week, for months, for years. If, by some miracle, you managed to last that long, it would become a symbol of your miserable existence. Each spoonful you forced down your throat, a fresh reminder of your captivity, your degradation, your utter lack of choice. Now, this high-carbohydrate, relatively low-fat diet, it had another supposed purpose, beyond just being cheap and providing basic energy. Some Roman writers and even some modern scholars suggest that it helped to form a thicker layer of subcutaneous fat on the gladiators. A bit of extra padding around the muscles. Why, you ask? Why would they want you to be a bit soft? Well, the charming theory was that this layer of fat offered some slight protection to the nerves, to the major blood vessels. During a fight, it was in essence a living shield, woven from barley and beans and despair. So you weren't aiming for that lean, sculpted, heroic physique you see on statues of gods and heroes. You were aiming to be, well, a slightly pudgier, more padded target, in the desperate, pathetic hope that when a sword point or a trident prong inevitably struck you, it might just hit that layer of fat. A superficial cut, a flesh wound. Instead of immediately severing an artery or piercing a vital organ, it was a small, grim comfort when you were facing a man armed with very sharp steel, whose sole intention was to kill you for the entertainment of thousands, and to drink with this delightful fare, water, of course, often tepid, lukewarm, sometimes tasting faintly of the clay pipes it flowed through, or the wooden barrel it was stored in. Hopefully not too many dead insects floating in it. But wait, there's more. There was another charming beverage often on the menu. A special health drink, if you will. Just for you and your fellow gladiators, known as the ash drink. Doesn't that sound delicious, appetizing, refreshing? Gee, like something you'd order at a trendy, high-end health spa in California. Not. It was typically water, mixed with vinegar, the cheap, sour, acidic kind. The stuff that was probably also used for cleaning. And the star ingredient, plant ash. Yes, you heard that right. Ash, from burnt wood, or other burnt plant matter, stirred into your drink. This charming, gritty cocktail was believed by some Roman medical thinkers to provide essential minerals, particularly calcium, and maybe potassium or magnesium, to help with bone strength, to aid in the healing of fractures. And given the sheer number of broken bones you and your colleagues were likely to sustain during the brutal training sessions or in the actual arena fights, this was probably considered a grim necessity by your keepers. A cheap, if thoroughly disgusting way to try and patch you up, to keep you fighting fit, or at least fighting. Imagine the taste. Try to, if you dare, sour from the vinegar, making your mouth pucker, Gritty, from the ash particles that never quite dissolved. No matter how much you stirred it, you'd feel them between your teeth, with an underlying alkaline bitterness, a weird, chalky aftertaste. It probably scraped your throat on the way down. It might have made you gag the first few times, but you'd drink it, you'd force it down, holding your nose maybe, because you were told to. Because any potential benefit, however unpalatable the delivery system, was better than nothing when your bones were constantly at risk of being shattered into splinters. Meat, what about meat? Protein, meat was a rare luxury in the ludus. It was expensive. It was likely reserved for the top-tier gladiators, the champions, the established crowd pleasers, the Lannister's prize investments, or for very special occasions, like the night before you were scheduled to fight in the arena. The cena libera, that's Latin for the free dinner. Though, as we've established, nothing was ever truly free in your world. Maybe, just maybe, you'd get a small taste of meat then. A bit of pork, perhaps, or some tough goat. Some ancient sources and even some modern archaeological analysis of gladiator bones suggests that their diet was indeed overwhelmingly vegetarian. There are even theories that sometimes, if an animal was killed during the Venationese, the wild animal hunts in the arena, or if an animal kept in the ludus stables for training purposes happened to die, its meat might have been salvaged, recycled. Waste not, want not, after all. Especially when it comes to free protein, you might have found yourself eating a piece of the very lion you were supposed to be fighting the next day, or its less fortunate cousin. A truly grim thought to chew on along with your tough, stringy mouthful. Eating in the ludus, it was often done in an atmosphere of tense silence, or under very strict rules. No talking at mealtimes. That was a common rule in many gladiator schools. Keep your mouth shut and the only sounds you'd hear would be the scraping of rough pottery spoons against even rougher pottery bowls. The sound of men chewing, swallowing, grimly, mechanically. Men who knew that this meager, joyless, unappetizing slop was all that stood between them and utter collapse during the brutal afternoon training sessions that inevitably awaited them. You learned to eat quickly, efficiently, head down. Avoid eye contact. Don't draw attention to yourself. Don't look like you're enjoying it, not that you would. And definitely, do not complain about the food, unless you wanted a demonstration of how a whip handle tasted. Just get the fuel inside you, and prepare your body and mind for the next round of officially sanctioned suffering. Because in the ludus, suffering, it was always on the daily menu. The nutritional reality of this diet, while it fertile provided calories and bulk, it was likely deficient in many important things, certain vitamins, trace minor, less not found in cheap grain or plant ash. Good quality protein was scarce. Chronic digestive issues must have been rampant, bloating from all the beans and barley, gas, constipation from the sheer volume of fiber, or, sometimes the opposite, bouts of diarrhea from poorly stored or contaminated food. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C wasn't unheard of in the ancient world, leading to bleeding gums and poor wound healing. Skin problems. A general lack of vitality. Your body, it was constantly under immense stress, from the relentless physical training, from the pervasive psychological fear, from the poor sanitation and overcrowded conditions. And this diet, while it kept you alive, just about, it didn't exactly help you thrive. It didn't build a truly strong, resilient, healthy body. It just helped you endure. It kept the machine running, on the cheapest possible fuel, until, inevitably, the machine broke down, one way or another. So, you've choked down your barley breakfast, that delightful gray mush that passes for food in this place. You've had your charming ash water chaser. Good for the bones, they say. Tastes like, well, exactly like ash and vinegar. Now, the real fun begins. The main reason you're even still drawing breath in this God's forsaken ludus. The core of your miserable, unending existence here. Training. And when I say training, I need you to erase any modern image you might have. This isn't a friendly workout session at the local gym with an encouraging personal trainer. This isn't about getting fit, feeling good, or achieving personal bests. No, this was brutal. It was relentless. It was unyielding. It was designed to do one thing and one thing only. To attempt to forge your pathetic, terrified self into a weapon. A weapon that could just maybe entertain a bloodthirsty Roman crowd for a few minutes before you died. or to break you completely in the process. The Lanista, that's the owner of this fine establishment, remember? He probably didn't care deeply which way it went, as long as he got some use out of you, or some profit from your eventual and likely messy demise. The new recruits, the tirones as the Romans called them, that's the Latin word for the beginners, the novices, the fresh meat. Like you'd start at the very, very bottom, the absolute lowest rung, with the most basic, most humiliating, most exhausting drills. And your first training partner, your first opponent in this new life of violence, it wasn't another man. Not yet. It was a post, just a heavy wooden stake. The Romans called it a palace. Picture a thick log, really, stripped of its bark, maybe 6 feet tall, driven firmly, unyieldingly into the packed, dusty earth of the training yard. This inanimate chunk of wood was your first challenge, your first tormentor. You'd be given a wooden sword. The Romans called this practice sword a rudis, but this wasn't the special lightweight kind of rudis that a tiny handful of incredibly skilled gladiators received when they won their freedom. Oh no, that was a symbol of honor, a badge of survival. This training rudis, the one thrust into your trembling hand, it was often deliberately made much heavier than a real sharp metal fighting sword. The gladius, sometimes they said it was twice as heavy, and they'd give you a shield, probably made of wicker, like a very strong, very stiff basket, or sometimes solid wood. This too was usually heavier, much heavier than the kind of shield you might, if you lived that long, eventually use in the actual arena. The theory behind this delightful piece of Roman personal training philosophy: if you could train for hours on end, swinging this ridiculously overweight wooden sword, lugging this impossibly heavy shield, then a real sword and a real shield, if you ever got that far, would feel as light as a feather in your hand. You'd be quicker, stronger, or so the thinking went. That was the theory anyway. The reality was, it just made the training even more exhausting, more painful, more likely to cause injury. And it assumed you'd survive long enough to benefit from it. A very, very big assumption. Your doctor, that's the Roman word for your trainer. And let me be clear again, he wasn't a medical doctor. He wasn't there to heal your wounds. Oh no, he was usually the one causing most of them. He was likely an ex-gladiator himself, a scarred-up, hardened veteran who had somehow, against all odds, managed to survive his own time on the blood-soaked sand. Maybe he'd won his freedom, his own rudis, or maybe he was just too old, too broken, too crippled from his own fighting career to enter the arena anymore. So now he taught others, or rather he tormented them. He brutalized them. He passed on the misery. These doctoras, these trainers, they weren't there to be your friend, your mentor, your confidant. They weren't there to inspire you with rousing motivational speeches about glory and hun. Oh, they were there to drill you, mercilessly, endlessly, to beat the clumsiness out of you, to hammer discipline into your skull through sheer repetition and fear, and to make absolutely certain that you were utterly, completely terrified of them. Their word was law, their displeasure meant pain. So there you are, standing in the dust of the training yard, the sun beating down on your exposed head, facing that unblinking, unfeeling wooden post, the palace, and you'd spend hours, endless, mind-numbing, muscle-burning, soul-destroying hours, in front of that post. Attack, block, parry, move your feet, keep your stance correct, again and again and again, until your arms felt like they were filled with molten lead, until your legs trembled so violently you could barely remain standing, until your vision blurred from exhaustion and the sweat stinging your eyes. The doctor, the trainer, he'd be there watching, always watching, his arms probably crossed, a sneer on his lips, shouting MMANDS, barking criticisms, hurling a constant stream of insults and abuse. Higher with the shield, you pathetic worm, he'd bellow, his voice cracking like a whip. Strike like you mean it. That wouldn't bruise a newborn lamb. Are you a fighter or a flower girl? He'd threaten, maybe taking a step closer, his shadow falling over you. My grandmother, God's rest her soul, moves faster than you, and she's been dead and buried for 10 years, he'd mock, perhaps getting a chuckle from the other guards or more senior gladiators watching your humiliation. If you dropped your guard even for a second, if your stance was sloppy, your balance off, if your strike was weak or landed on the wrong part of the post, you'd feel it, instantly. The sharp, stinging crack of his practice rod, a long, hard stick often made of vine wood across your back, your legs, your shoulders, sometimes your head, or the bite of his whip, pain. That was a primary teaching tool in the ludus, perhaps the primary tool you learned very quickly, or you were supposed to learn very quickly, to try and avoid it. To do exactly as you were told, without question, without hesitation. Or at least, you tried. God knows you tried. Exhaustion would wash over you, a suffocating wave of pure physical depletion. But you couldn't stop. You couldn't just drop your heavy wooden sword and say, "I need a break." You couldn't show weakness. You couldn't complain. That would only invite more attention, more scorn, more punishment. So you pushed through the pain. You pushed through the dizzying fatigue. You pushed until the doctor finally decided you'd had enough for that particular drill. Or, more often, until you simply collapsed in the dust, a trembling, gasping, pathetic heap. And even then, you might get a kick for your trouble. Get up, scum, the post isn't tired yet. And it wasn't just about randomly hitting the post. It was about how you hit it, where you hit it, with precision. The trainer's wool. Demonstrate, often on you or another unfortunate recruit. Specific target areas. The throat, a killing blow. The chest, aiming for the heart or lungs. Another fight ender. The groin, a debilitating, agonizing injury. The legs, to cripple an opponent, to bring them down. You were being programmed. Methodically, brutally, like a machine. To see an opponent, not as a fellow human being, but as a collection of vulnerable points. A series of targets, places to stab, places to slash, places to exploit. This initial phase of training, just you and that damn wooden post, it could last for weeks, maybe even months if you were particularly uncoordinated, or if the doctor just took a dislike to you. Many poor souls didn't even make it past this grueling, mind-numbing stage. They broke. Sometimes their bodies simply gave out. An old injury from their previous life flared up and became unbearable. Or they sustained a new one from the relentless, awkward practice, a torn muscle, a dislocated joint. Sometimes their minds just shattered. The constant fear, the unending pain, the utter hopelessness of it all. It was too much for a human psyche to bear. A moment of outright defiance, a desperate refusal to train anymore, sheer crushing despair overwhelming them, until they just lay down and wouldn't get up, and they'd be, well, disposed of. That's a nice, clean way of putting it, isn't it? That could mean many things, none of them pleasant. A quick, unseen knife in a dark corner. Sold off to an even worse fate if that was possible. Or simply left to die of neglect in their cell. They became another piece of failed raw material. Worthless to the Lanista as a fighter. A bad investment, but if you showed some small spark, some tiny flicker of aptitude, some animal resilience that even this place couldn't extinguish, some basic, terrified ability to follow orders, and crucially to endure appalling amounts of pain without completely falling apart or dying, then you might graduate from the palace, from the training post, if you could call it graduating. It wasn't a promotion to a better life. It was simply a promotion to a different and often more dangerous level of torment, sparring, actually fighting with other new recruits, other tirones, still with those heavy wooden weapons most likely at first, or maybe blunted metal ones if the Lanista felt you were ready not to accidentally kill each other too quickly. But now, your target hit back, your target moved, your target thought, your target felt pain, your target bled, just like you. This was a whole new universe of fear. The wooden post, the palace, it didn't have eyes that stared back at you with a mixture of raw terror and desperate aggression. The post didn't scream when you hit it hard. It didn't bleed. But another man did. Another man who was just as scared, just as brutalized, just as hopelessly trapped as you were, and just as eager, just as desperate to inflict pain on you, if only to avoid receiving it himself for a few precious seconds. These sparring sessions, they weren't friendly contests. They weren't about sportsmanship or fair play. They were often brutal, clumsy, chaotic affairs. Especially with beginners like you, who were still awkward with their weapons, incoordinated in their movements, and driven by pure, unadulterated, life-or-death fear. Injuries were incredibly common, expected even. Broken fingers from a badly blocked blow with a heavy wooden sword, cracked ribs from an awkward fall, or a heavy shield slammed into your side, knocked out teeth, split lips that bled for hours, black eyes that swelled shut, nasty deep bruises that turned your skin a horrifying palette of purple, black, and green. All part underscore of the learning process, the doctores would tell you, probably with a grin. All part of the hardening, the toughening up, the desensitization, getting you used to violence, up close and personal, used to inflicting it, used to the sight and smell of fresh blood, and used to receiving it, used to the taste of your own blood in your mouth. Because in the real arena, there would be no wooden swords, no blunted edges, no pulling punches, only razor-sharp steel. And real blood, gallons of it, your blood, or his, or both. The crowd didn't pay to see a polite fencing match. So you're sparring now, if you can call it that. More like a desperate, clumsy, often terrifying struggle with another human being who is just as miserable as you are. Wooden swords, maybe blunted metal ones if you're lucky. The sting of the blows, the taste of your own blood, the constant barking commands of the doctores, the trainers. This is your life now, day in, day out. The doctores themselves, these trainers, they were a special breed. As we said, many were ex-gladiators, men who had survived the arena, men who carried the scars, physical and mental, of that survival. Some might have been competent teachers in a brutal sort of way, able to impart actual fighting skill, able to see a flicker of potential in a raw recruit. Others were probably just sadists, men who enjoyed the power, enjoyed inflicting pain, enjoyed breaking others just as they themselves had once been broken. You'd pray to whatever forgotten gods you still half believed in, that you didn't get one of those. But prayers in the ludus, they usually went unanswered. They watched you, constantly, their eyes, like hawks, missing nothing. They weren't just looking for skill with a weapon, though that mattered a bit. They were looking for other things too, things that made a gladiator profitable, things that made a gladiator entertaining. Did you have aggression, a spark of raw animal fury they could nurture? Good. The crowd liked aggression. Were you quick, agile, able to dodge and weave? They might try to train you as a retiarius. That's the gladiator who fought with a net and a trident, a three-pronged spear. A crowd favorite often, lightly armed but dangerous if skilled. Or maybe a thrax, a Thracian-style fighter, with a small, often square shield, and a wicked, curved short sword called a sicca, good for getting around an opponent's defenses. Were you big, strong, able to take a lot of punishment and keep coming? Maybe they'd try to mold you into a murmillo, one of the more heavily armed types, big oblong shield, good solid sword, the gladius, a helmet that often had a fish crest on it, or a secutor, the pursuer, similar heavy armor, specifically designed to fight against that net man, the retiarius. His helmet was smooth, rounded with tiny eye holes to stop the net from snagging. Imagine fighting in that. Claustrophobic, limited vision. Terrifying. But you, if you weren't showing any particular star potential, if you were just average, clumsy perhaps, slow, but tough enough to absorb a beating, or too scared to actually fight back effectively, they might have other, less glamorous and far more dangerous plans for you. There were types of gladiators who were essentially just cannon fodder. Human props. There to make the other guy look good. Or to die in a particularly messy, spectacular, or sometimes even comically inept way, for the crowd's twisted amusement. We'll get to those special categories of it really sucked to be you gladiators a bit later in our journey. For now, just know that the doctores were assessing you, figuring out where you'd fit in the Lannisters' bloody business plan. And your preferences, your hopes, your dreams, they didn't factor into that equation. At all. The training, it wasn't just about learning how to swing a sword or hold a shield. It was deeply, profoundly psychological. It was about breaking you, breaking your will, breaking your spirit, stripping away your old identity, remaking you into something else. Something that could kill another human being without hesitation, without remorse. Something that could face its own imminent, violent death without completely falling apart in a gibbering mess of fear. Or so they hoped. That was the ideal anyway. They wanted to strip away your humanity. Because humanity, things like compassion, empathy, mercy, those were dangerous liabilities in the arena. Those could get you killed. And a gladiator who died too easily, or too boringly, or who showed too much fear, well, that was bad for business, bad for the Lannisters' reputation, bad for his profits. So the abuse was constant, not just the physical pain. But the verbal abuse, the humiliation, you were constantly reminded of your lowly status. You were scum. You were property. You were less than worthless, except for the brief, bloody entertainment you might provide. They would try to desensitize you to violence, to the sight of blood, to the sounds of pain, your own and others. Injuries in the training yard were common, very common. A badly aimed blow with a wooden sword could still break bones, dislocate joints, knock you unconscious, and medical care. Well, if you were a prize fighter, a champion in the making, you might get some decent attention. A medicus, a doctor of sorts, often associated with the ludus, stitches, poultices, setting bones. They'd want to get you back on your feet, back to training as quickly as possible, to protect the investment. But if you were just a tyro, a nobody, you might get a splash of cheap wine on the wound. It was a mild antiseptic, or a filthy rag to tie around it, and then you'd be expected to get back to training as soon as you could stand, or risk being deemed useless, defective. And we know what happened to defective goods. The Lannister himself, the owner of this academy of agony, he might not be in the training yard every single day, cracking the whip personally. Some were more hands-on than others, but his presence, his policies, his cold, calculating will, it loomed over everything. He was the one who set the rules. He was the one who decided who fought, when, and often who died. He owned you, body and soul. The doctoras, the trainers, were just his enforcers, his brutal overseers. Fear of the Lannister, it was a powerful motivator. You knew that your entire existence here depended on his whim. A bad report from a doctor, a perceived lack of effort, a moment of rebellion, and he could make your already miserable life infinitely worse, or end it, and the sheer crushing monotony of it all. Day after day, week after week, month after month if you survived that long. The same brutal wake-up, the same disgusting food, the same exhausting, painful drills, the same fear, the same despair. There was no escape, no respite, no hope, really. Just the endless grind. How did men endure it? Some didn't, we know that. Suicide, though difficult in such a controlled environment, was not unheard of. Others probably just shut down, became empty shells, automatons going through the motions, dead inside long before they ever stepped onto the arena sand. Maybe some found a grim sort of camaraderie with their fellow sufferers, a shared understanding of their terrible plight. Bonds formed in the crucible of shared misery. But even those bonds were tainted, because the man you shared your bread with today, the man you sparred with, bled with, he might be the man you were ordered to kill in the arena tomorrow, or the man ordered to kill you. What a delightful thought to carry with you into your flea-ridden sleep. This wasn't just physical conditioning. It was a systematic dismantling of the human spirit, an attempt to transform a man into a monster, or at least into a cog that would perform its bloody function without too much fuss. It was a school of hard knocks, yes, but it was also a factory for producing broken men, and the success rate, in terms of creating survivors, was terrifyingly low. Most who entered the ludus, they never walked out as free men. They were carried out, or dragged out, their value expended, their suffering finally at an end. And most people think of Roman gladiators. They picture two heavily armed men, locked in a dramatic, skillful, one-on-one duel to the death. And yes, those kinds of fights, the classic gladiatorial combats, they certainly happened. They were often the main event, the star attraction. But the Roman games, the munera as they were sometimes called, meaning duties or offerings, originally for the dead, but later just straight-up entertainment. Oh, they were so much more than just that. The Roman appetite for bloodshed and spectacle, it was vast, it was varied, and for you, the non-famous, utterly expendable individual, it meant there were many, many different ways for your miserable life to end in front of a cheering crowd. The arena offered a full, horrifying menu of death and suffering, and you, my friend, were often just one of the ingredients. Let's start with the morning's entertainment. Before the star gladiators even thought about oiling their muscles, often the day's games I'll kick off with something called venationes. That's a Latin word. Venatio means a hunt. Plural, venationes. Wild animal hunts. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Maybe for the crowd, not so much if you were one of the poor souls tasked with hunting the animals, or more accurately, being hunted by them. Now, some men who fought animals, the bestiary as they were known, beast fighters basically, Some of them were skilled professionals, trained hunters, men who specialized in fighting lions, bears, bulls, whatever exotic and terrifying creatures the Romans could capture from the farthest corners of their empire and ship back to the arenas. These guys, some of them even became famous, in their own niche. But that's not who we're talking about. We're talking about you. The nobody, often the bestiary in these morning shows. They weren't skilled hunters at all. They were condemned criminals, damnati ad bestias. Remember that sentence? Condemned to the beasts, or just grade prisoners of war, or untrained slaves from the ludus deemed not even worthy of basic gladiator training. Pushed out into the arena with maybe a rickety spear, a small useless shield, sometimes just a pointed stick, or nothing at all. Their job, to be chased, to be mauled, to be torn apart by starved, enraged, terrified wild animals. Lions roaring with hunger, their eyes like yellow flames. Bears lumbering and powerful, swiping with claws like daggers. Leopards quick and deadly. Wild boars with tusks like razors. Packs of savage dogs, specially bred for their ferocity. The animals themselves were often goaded, starved, and terrified to make them even more aggressive for the show. It wasn't a hunt. It was a slaughter. A bloody, chaotic spectacle of humans being ripped to shreds. The crowd would roar its approval at every gory moment, your screams, your desperate attempts to fend off a creature far more powerful than you. That was the entertainment. A light appetizer before the main course of human-on-human violence. Your chances of surviving something like that, if you were one of the untrained bestiary, virtually zero. You were there to die, and to make the animals look good. Then, after the morning's animal carnage was swept away by the arena attendants, along with your mangled remains, it was often time for the midday entertainments. The meridiani, as we mentioned. The lunchtime show. This was when many of the wealthier, more refined spectators might leave the arena to have their lunch. The crowd that remained, it was often considered to be the less discerning. The ones with the strongest stomachs. And the midday show, it catered to their tastes. This was often when the noxi were dealt with. Noxi is another Latin term. It refers to harmful people, criminals, the ones condemned to death by various gruesome means. No pretense of a fair fight here, no sport. This was execution, pure and simple, but dressed up as theater. The Roman Philo, suffer Seneca, he once wrote about attending one of these midday shows, and he was horrified by what he saw. He said it was pure murder. He described men pushed out into the arena with no weapons, no armor, facing fully armed executioners, or sometimes other condemned men forced to kill each other. Seneca said the crowd would shout, "Kill him, lash him, burn him. Why does he run so timidly onto the sword? Why does he strike so feebly? Why doesn't he die willingly? Charming, isn't it?" There was no escape, no chance of mercy, just death, in a variety of inventive and horrible ways. Sometimes these midday executions were staged as elaborate, twisted reenactments of famous myths or historical events. Fatal charades, you could call them. Imagine a poor soul dressed up as the mythical character Icarus, who flew too close to the sun. Except in the arena version, Icarus would be hoisted high into the air, and then dropped, to his certain death, splattering onto the sand below, or Somio. They might be forced to play the part of Laureolus, a famous bandit from Roman legend. In the arena show, Laureolus would be crucified, and then, while still alive and nailed to the cross, a hungry bear would be released to maul him to death. The Romans, they had a vivid, if deeply disturbing, imagination when it came to public executions. And if you were a noxious, a condemned criminal, this was your stage, your final terrible performance. Your agony was the script. Your death was the applause line. And sometimes, though less common and usually reserved for truly massive emperor-funded spectacles, there were the namachiae, mock naval battles. Yes, you heard that right. They would flood the arena itself or a specially constructed basin. And then they'd stage sea fights with real ships, and real fighting, and real drowning. Who do you think a lot of the sailors and marines were in these namachiae, often thousands of condemned criminals or prisoners of war, given weapons, for CED onto these ships, and then told to fight each other to the death, or to be sunk, or to be picked off by archers if they tried to surrender or refuse to fight. Imagine the chaos, the terror, men drowning in the artificial lake, surrounded by thousands of cheering spectators. It was spectacle on an epic, horrifying scale. And again, If you were one of the unlucky souls forced to participate, your chances of seeing the sunset were slim to none. So you see, the Roman arena, it wasn't just about two skilled gladiators in a fair fight. It was a multi-course banquet of brutality, animal slaughter in the morning, gruesome theatrical executions at midday. And then, yes, in the afternoon you might get the more classic gladiator combats. But even those, as we'll soon see, were often far from fair and incredibly dangerous, especially if you weren't one of the famous heavily protected stars. For the average gladiator, the bestiarius, the noxious, the arena was a place of almost unimaginable terror, a place where your life was worth absolutely nothing beyond the fleeting, bloody entertainment it could provide to a jaded, thrill-seeking crowd. It truly sucked to be on that menu. So, you're in the ludus, the gladiator school. You're being trained, or at least they're attempting to train you. The doctoras, the trainers, are watching you, assessing you, and maybe, just maybe, they decide you're not quite cut out for the glamorous, heroic roles. Maybe you're too clumsy, too slow, too scared, or maybe you're just unlucky, and they assign you to a gladiator type that is, even by Roman standards, particularly awful. A role designed for a quick, brutal, and thoroughly uncelebrated exit. Let's meet a few of these unfortunate specialists. First up, imagine being a crupularius. Now that's a mouthful, isn't it? Crupularius. We know about these guys mainly from the Roman historian Tacitus. He describes them as heavily armored Gallic gladiators, from Gaul, remember, modern France. And when I say heavily armored, I mean heavily armored. Picture a man encased head to toe in metal, segmented armor covering his entire body, like a walking tank, or a very clumsy, very slow metal beetle. Sounds impressive, right? Sounds invincible. Wrong, so very wrong. Tacitus tells us that their armor was so thick, so cumbersome, that it was almost impossible to wound them with normal weapons like swords or spears. The blows just glanced off. But here's the kicker. The armor was also so heavy, so restrictive, that the crupularius himself could barely move. He couldn't fight effectively. He couldn't attack with any speed or agility. He was essentially a slow-moving, heavily defended target. A defensive powerhouse who couldn't actually do much defending in an active sense, or any attacking. Imagine being inside that suit of armor. It's hot, you can barely breathe, your vision is restricted, you're clanking around the arena slow and awkward. Your opponent probably a more lightly armed and agile gladiator is running circles around you. Maybe he's taunting you. Maybe the crowd is laughing at your clumsiness. You can't land a blow. You can barely even turn to face him properly. It must have been incredibly frustrating and terrifying. You're protected, yes, but you're also trapped, a prisoner inside your own defenses. And how did these fights often end for the crupularius? According to Tacitus, in one instance, Roman soldiers had to be called in to deal with some rebellious Gallic crepellery. And these regular soldiers, legionaries, they couldn't get through the armor with their swords either. So what did they do? They used hatchets and pickaxes. They literally had to hack and pry the crepellery apart, like opening armored tin cans, battering them to the ground. And once a crupularius was down with all that weight of armor, it was almost impossible for him to get back up. He'd just lie there, helpless, waiting for the final brutal blow. W.S. Tacitus said they lay there, without an effort to rise, like dead men. Not exactly a glorious end, is it? Being hacked apart like a stubborn piece of metalwork. The crowd probably found it tedious after a while, or just grimly amusing. It definitely sucked to be a crupularius. Heavy protection, zero dignity, horrible end. Now let's consider another unfortunate role, the andabata. Andabata. This one is just bizarre and cruel, even for the Romans. The andabata was a gladiator who fought blind. Yes, blind. Usually they wore a helmet that had no eye holes at all, or a visor that completely covered their eyes. Imagine that. You're pushed out into the arena. You can hear the roar of the crowd, a terrifying, deafening wave of sound. You can smell the dust, the blood, the fear. But you can see nothing, absolutely nothing, just blackness. You'd likely be armed, perhaps with a sword, and your opponent, also an andabata, also fighting blind. So you have two men stumbling around the arena, completely sightless, flailing with their weapons, hoping to hit something, anything, preferably not a wall. Or the referee, it must have been utterly disorienting, utterly terrifying. Every sound would be magnified, every touch a shock. The crowd, they probably found this hilarious, or at least a curious novelty. The sheer absurdity of it, the clumsiness, the pathetic blind swings. It wasn't about skill, it wasn't about bravery. It was a freak show, a cruel joke, and you were the punchline. The chances of a serious accidental injury were incredibly high. Even if you didn't get killed by your equally blind opponent, you could easily stumble, fall, impale yourself. And for what? A few moments of bizarre, degrading entertainment for a crowd that probably forgot your existence the moment your body was dragged from the sand. Being an andabata, a true nightmare. Then there were the catervari. This isn't a specific type of gladiator, like a murmillo or ricciario. This catervari comes from the Latin word caterva, which means a group, a troop, a crowd, or even a gang. So, catervari were gladiators who fought in groups, mass brawls, team battles. Instead of a single focused duel, you'd have maybe 10, 20, or even more men on each side, all fighting at once in a chaotic melee. Sounds like epic Hollywood battle stuff, right? Maybe. If you were watching, not so much if you were in it, and you weren't a star. Imagine being shoved into the arena as part of one of these catervi, these gangs. You're probably not a highly trained elite fighter. Those guys were usually reserved for the prestige duels. They were too valuable to risk in a chaotic free-for-all. No, you're likely one of the more expendable members of the ludus. The training for these mass fights was probably minimal. More about basic group tactics, if anything. Try to stick together and don't kill your own side too often. The arena becomes a swirling vortex of violence. Men shouting, screaming, weapons clashing everywhere. Dust rising, choking you, obscuring your vision. It's hard to tell friend from foe in the chaos. The risk of getting hit by someone on your own side, a stray spear, an errant sword swing, it was very real. There's no room for individual skill to shine here. No chance for a display of elegant swordsmanship. It's just a desperate, brutal scrum. Survival often depends more on luck than on skill. Are you in the wrong place at the wrong time? Do you stumble? Do you get surrounded? You're probably wearing basic functional armor if you're lucky. Nothing fancy. And if you go down, if you're wounded, in a one-on-one duel, you might have a chance to appeal for mercy, for missio. But in the middle of a raging mass brawl with dozens of men still fighting, who's going to notice you? Who's going to care? You're more likely to be trampled underfoot, or finished off quickly and impersonally by someone from the opposing team who barely even registers your XC. Stance, you're just another body, another number to be subtracted from the total. Being a catervarius meant you were part of a bloody, anonymous tide of violence. Expendable, forgettable, and let's not forget our old friend, the damnatus ad gladium, the man condemned to the sword. We touched on him earlier, in the context of Roman justice, but imagine it from his perspective for just a moment. You're not a gladiator by training. You're not a volunteer. You're not even a prisoner of war who's been given a few months of basic drilling in the ludus. You are a condemned criminal, and your sentence is death, today. In this arena, you're pushed out from a dark tunnel into the blinding sunlight of the arena floor. The roar of the crowd hits you like a physical force, thousands upon thousands of them, screaming for your blood. You might be given a weapon, a small, cheap sword, or a dagger, something to give the illusion of a fight, to make it slightly more sporting for the crowd. Your opponent, a towering, heavily armored professional gladiator. A secutor, a murmillo, a man who kills for a living, a man who has trained for years for this moment. He looks at you with cold indifference, or perhaps even contempt. You are not a worthy opponent. You are a task, an execution he has to perform. What goes through your mind in those few terrible seconds? Abject terror, most likely. Despair, maybe a desperate, hopeless prayer to any god who might be listening. Though they rarely seem to be, there's no chance of survival here. No hope of missio, of mercy. Your death is preordained. It's the whole point of you being here. The fight, if you can even call it that, is probably over in seconds. A quick, brutal, efficient dispatch. And then your body is dragged out, unceremoniously. Another damnatus who has served his purpose. It doesn't get much suckier than that. These are just a few examples. The Roman arena was a place of endless morbid creativity when it came to finding new ways for men to suffer and die for the crowd. If you weren't a star, if you weren't one of the chosen few who captured the public's imagination, you were just part of the machinery of death, a nameless face in a bloody spectacle, and your particular type of suckfest, it was just another variation on a very familiar, very grim theme. So, the word comes down. Maybe your Lanista, the school owner, informs your doctor, your trainer. Maybe your name is just posted on a grubby notice board somewhere in the ludus. Or maybe a guard just prods you in the ribs and grunts, "You, arena, 3 days," however you find out. The news hits you like a physical blow, a cold fist of fear clenching in your gut. You are scheduled to fight, to step out onto that blood-soaked sand. In front of thousands of screaming Romans, your moment is coming. If you can call a public spectacle designed around your probable death. A moment. What was the night before like? For you, the nobody, the tyro, the wreck. Buit, who hasn't yet made a name for himself. Don't imagine quiet contemplation, or noble prayers to the gods for victory. More likely, it was a night filled with raw, primal fear. Sleep, probably impossible. You'd lie there in your stinking cell on your flea-ridden straw. Every distant sound from the city outside, the roar of a crowd from some other entertainment, the music from a tavern, it would sound like a prelude to your own doom. The clanking of a guard's sandals in the corridor, it would make your heart leap into your throat. Are they coming for you early? Is there a change of plan? Maybe you try to go over your training in your head. The moves the doctor beat into you, the way to hold your shield, the way to thrust your sword. But fear has a way of scrambling your thoughts, turning your mind into a frantic, useless mess. You might hear other men in the nearby cells, some muttering prayers, some weeping softly in the darkness, some boasting loudly, a pathetic attempt to mask their own terror. The air in the ludus that night, it would be thick with a collective inspoken dread. And then, there was the Cena Libera. That's Latin. It means the free dinner, or the free feast. It was a tradition. The night before gladiators were due to fight, they were often given a special meal. Sounds nice, doesn't it? A good feed before you potentially meet your end. For the star gladiators, the champions, it might have actually been a decent spread. Roasted meats, wine, maybe even some fruit or pastries. A chance to indulge. But for you, the unknown, the expendable, your Cena Libera, it was probably just slightly better slop than usual. Maybe a bit more barley in your pottage. Perhaps a small, stringy piece of actual meat, if the Lanista was feeling generous. Or if it helped the odds of you not collapsing from malnutrition before the fight even started. The wine, if you got any, it was likely the cheap, sour stuff. The kind that gave you a headache almost insta. NTLY. And this feast, it wasn't a relaxed, enjoyable affair. Often the public was allowed to come and watch the gladiators eat their Cena Libera. Yes, you heard that right. People would pay to come and gawp at you, to stare at the men who were going to die for their entertainment the next day. They'd point. They'd comment on your physique, or your apparent lack of it. They might place bets on you, or more likely, against you. Imagine trying to eat your meager meal, your potential last meal, with dozens, maybe hundreds of curious, morbid, uncaring eyes fixed on you. It was just another layer of humiliation. Another way to remind you that you were not a person. You were a spectacle, even when you were just trying to eat your dinner. Some gladiators, the ones with a bit of fight left in them, might play up to the crowd, boasting, flexing. Others, like you perhaps, would just keep their heads down, try to ignore the stares, try to choke down the food that tasted like ash in your mouth, because you knew you'd need the strength, however little it might provide. The morning of the games, you'd be woken even earlier than usual, that same brutal reveille, but today it would feel different. Today, there's an edge to everything, a terrible finality. You might hear the sounds of the city waking up outside the walls of the ludus, the distant rumble of carts, the shouts of merchants, and maybe, if the arena was close by, you might hear the faint, growing roar of the crowd as they started to arrive, a sound that would make the blood run cold in your veins. Then, the preparations, getting armed. Now, if you were a famous champion gladiator, you'd have your own armor, probably custom-fitted, maybe even decorated, polished to a high shine. Your weapons would be well-maintained, sharp, reliable. You were an investment, and you needed to look the part, but you, the nameless Tiro, the guy they're just throwing in to fill out the numbers or to be an easy kill for a more favor. D-Fighter, your experience would be very, very different. You'd likely be issued your equipment from the Ludus Armory, and it probably wouldn't be top-of-the-line stuff. More likely, it would be old, second-hand, third-hand, the stuff the better gladiators didn't want anymore. Your helmet, it might be dented. The padding inside, if there was any, might be rotten and stinking of old sweat from a dozen previous wearers. It might not fit properly, rocking on your head or obscuring your vision even more than it was designed to. Your shield, it might be splintered. The leather straps frayed and unreliable. Your sword, it might be poorly balanced, the edge perhaps a little dull or nicked from previous encounters. Not that a slightly dull sword wouldn't still kill you, or someone else. Your greaves, the shin guards, if you even got any, they might be mismatched, or too loose, clattering around your legs, or too tight, cutting into your skin. Imagine the feeling, knowing your life depended on this substandard, ill-fitting, probably damaged equipment. While your opponent, he might be kitted out like a god of war, it was just another way the odds were stacked against you from the very beginning. And then, it was time for the pompa. The pompa, that's the Latin word for the grand procession. The pre-game parade. All the participants in the day's games, the gladiators, the bestiary, the animal fighters, the musicians, the priests, the officials, they would parade around the arena. A chance for the crowd to see who was fighting, a chance to build anticipation. For the star gladiators, this was their moment to shine. They'd march confidently, heads held high, soaking up the cheers, maybe acknowledging their fans. They were the main attraction. But where were you in this pompa? You, the unknown, you were probably just there, an anonymous figure in the ranks, maybe lumped in with a group of other equally terrified Tirones. No cheers for you, no admiring glances, just the indifferent, or perhaps even contemptuous, gaze of the crowd. They weren't here to see you achieve glory. Most of them were here to see you bleed, to see you die. The pompa, it wasn't a parade in your honor. It was you being paraded like a condemned man on his way to the execution block. A public display of the human cattle about to be slaughtered for their amusement. The noise, the sheer, overwhelming scale of the arena, the thousands upon thousands of faces staring down at you, it would be enough to make your knees buckle, your stomach churn. But you had to keep marching, towards your moment, towards the sand, towards the almost certain prospect of pain and terror and death. The build-up was just a slow, agonizing tightening of the noose around your neck. The gate groans open. A rectangle of blinding, dust-filled sunlight appears before you. A guard shoves you hard. Move, scum, out there, and you stumble forward, out of the darkness, into the roar. The sheer scale of it hits you first. The arena, the Colosseum maybe if you're in Rome, or some provincial imitation, but it's vast. A towering bowl of stone packed to the rafters with people, tens of thousands of them, faces, a blur of faces all staring down at you. And the noise, oh the noise, it's not just cheering, it's a physical force, a wave of sound that washes over you, makes your bones vibrate, roars, shouts, screams, laughter, stamping feet, it's deafening, disorienting, terrifying. This isn't the distant murmur you heard from the Ludus, the gladiator school. This is the belly of the beast. The smell hits you too, hot sun on sand, dust, the metallic tang of old blood, and probably fresh blood too from whatever horrors came before you. The animal hunts, the midday executions, the faint, sickly, sweet smell of fear, sweat, your own, and that of countless others who have stood on this spot. Maybe the faint, exotic scent of perfumes worn by the wealthy spectators in the good seats. A bizarre contra, saying to the stench of death all around. You're out there, on the sand. The vast, empty expanse of it stretches before you. It's not clean, pristine sand. It's probably stained dark in patches, raked over, but the evidence of past butchery is always there. You feel incredibly small, incredibly exposed. A tiny, insignificant speck in this colossal theater of cruelty. Your opponent. Where is he? You squint against the light, your ill-fitting helmet probably shifting, further obscuring your vision. Ah, there he is. Maybe he's one of the Lannisters, your school owner's favored fighters. Looking confident, well-equipped. Maybe he's a seasoned veteran, his body a roadmap of old scars, his eyes cold and assessing. Or maybe, just maybe, he looks almost as terrified as you do. Another piece of fodder thrown into the meat grinder. But even then, he's still your enemy. The person you have to try and kill, or who will try to kill you. What's going through your mind right now, pure, unadulterated tea. Error most likely. Your heart is hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. Your mouth is dry. Your palms are sweating inside whatever cheap bindings you have on your hands. Adrenaline is coursing through you, making you tremble. But it's not the heroic kind of adrenaline. It's the prey animal kind, the kind that screams, run, hide, but there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Your training, those endless hours hitting the palace, that wooden post, those brutal sparring sessions, it all seems to evaporate. Your mind is a blank, buzzing void of fear. A desperate primal instinct to just survive might kick in, or you might just freeze, paralyzed by the sheer horror of it all. The crowd, are they even watching you? If this is one of the preliminary bouts, if you're just filler before the star gladiators come on, they might be indifferent, chatting amongst themselves, eating snacks, placing bets on the later fights. You're just background noise to them, or, if your fear is too obvious, if you look too pathetic, they might jeer, whistle, shout insults. Get on with it, kill the coward, impatience, contempt. They didn't pay good money to see two terrified amateurs trembling. They came for blood, for skill, for spectacle. And if you can't provide it in the way they want, they'll turn on you in an instant. The fight begins. There's probably a signal from the editor, the giver of the games, or the referee, the summa rudis, and then it's chaos. If you're lucky, your body might remember some of its training. You raise your cheap, splintered shield. You grip your probably ill-balanced sword. You move, or you try to. Your legs feel like lead. Your opponent comes at you, or you stumble towards him. It's not a graceful dance of blades, like in the epic poems. It's probably clumsy, awkward, desperate. A flurry of blows, most of them missing, or clanging harmlessly off a shield if you're lucky. You're breathing hard, gasping for air, the dust choking you. Your helmet feels like an oven. You can barely see. You can barely hear anything but the roar of the crowd and the pounding of your own blood in your ears. Maybe you land a blow, a lucky hit. Maybe your opponent stumbles. A brief flicker of hope or just surprise. More likely, he lands a blow on you. The shock of impact, pain, sharp, burning, your shield arm screams, your leg buckles, you see your own blood, bright red against the yellow sand, and the fear. It intensifies, becomes panic. This isn't a long, drawn-out strategic duel. Not for you, not for the non-famous fodder. These fights, they were often over quickly, brutally. You're outmatched, you're poorly equipped, you're terrified. You make a mistake, a fatal one. You leave an opening, and your opponent, he takes it. Because if he doesn't kill you, the Lannister or the crowd might demand his death for not being entertaining enough. A searing pain, darkness encroaching at the edges of your vision. The roar of the crowd seems to fade, then, surge, you're on the ground. The sand is rough against your cheek. It smells of iron and something else. Something final. You might hear a name being chanted. It's probably not yours. It's over. Your 5 minutes of hell. Or maybe it was only 1 minute, or 30 seconds, an eternity, and no time at all. You are just another statistic, another body to be dragged out by the arena attendants, the libatinari, the Roman undertakers, often with hooks, like a piece of meat. Your only contribution? A brief, bloody stain on the sand, and a fleeting moment of vicarious thrill for a crowd that has already forgotten your face, if they ever even saw it clearly in the first place. That was your moment. That was why it sucked to be you. Let's say you weren't killed outright, miraculously. Maybe your opponent's final blow wasn't instantly fatal. Maybe you just collapsed from exhaustion, blood loss, and sheer terror. You're lying there. The world is a blur of pain and confusion. What's going through your head? Not much, probably. Just a fog of agony. Maybe a dim awareness that you're still alive. For now, but that awareness, it might not be a comfort. If you were a star gladiator, a champion, and you went down wounded but having fought bravely, there might be a chance for missio. That's the Latin word for release or mercy. The crowd might call for it. The editor, the giver of the games, might grant it. You might be carefully carried off by attendants to be patched up by skilled physicians. Because you were valuable. An asset. Someone the crowd wanted to see fight again. But you, the tyro, the recruit, the nameless filler, the guy in the second-hand armor, don't count on such gentle treatment. If you're down, and clearly out of the fight, the arena attendants, the libatinari, that's a rather grim name. It's linked to Libitina, the Roman goddess of funerals and burials. These guys, They'll come for you, and they probably won't be gentle, no careful stretcher. For you, more likely, they'll drag you out unceremoniously, by your arms, by your legs, like a sack of bloody laundry, or a slaughtered animal, leaving a smear of your blood on the sand for the next poor souls to fight over. Where are they taking you? To a place that haunted the nightmares of every gladiator. A place whispered about in hushed, fearful tones in the darkest corners of the ludus, the gladiator school. They're taking you to the spoliarium. Spoliarium. The name itself sounds sinister, doesn't it? It comes from the Latin word spolare, which means to strip or to plunder. And that's exactly what happened there. The spoliarium was the stripping room. But it was more than that. It was the dying room, the death room. A grim, often subterranean chamber, usually located near one of the arena exits out of sight of the main crowd. Imagine being dragged or maybe half carried, if you're incredibly lucky, into this place. The light is dim, torches flickering, or maybe just the gloomy daylight filtering in from a narrow doorway. The air, it's thick, heavy, it stinks. Of stale blood, coagulated blood, new blood, of sweat, of urine, of fear, of death. The unmistakable cloying Swedish smell of death. It's probably cold, damp. The stone walls weeping moisture, or something worse. The sounds, if you're still conscious, you'll hear them. The groans of other wounded men, men dying, slowly, painfully. Maybe the occasional sharp cry of agony as someone is roughly handled. The clatter of metal as armor is stripped off bodies. The low, indifferent voices of the attendants as they go about their gruesome work. This isn't a hospital. This is a processing plant for the human wreckage of the arena. What happens in the spoliarium? Well, true to its name, the first order of business is stripping. If you're dead or dying, or just deemed not worth saving, they will take your armor, your weapons, your helmet, your greaves, everything. Remember that dented helmet and R.U.S.T.Y. sword the Lannister your owner gave you? It wasn't a gift, it was a loan. And now he wants it back. It's valuable to him. Even cheap, crappy armor costs money. It can be repaired, reused, given to the next poor sucker. So they'll pull it off you, roughly, without care for your wounds or your pain. If a piece of armor is stuck because of a swollen injury or embedded in a wound, they might just cut it away, or pry it off. Your comfort is not their concern. Recovering the Lannister's property is. And then, if there's any doubt that you're actually dead, they might perform a little test. There are accounts, some perhaps more legendary than strictly historical, but they fit the grim atmosphere, of an attendant dressed as Charon. Charon in Greek and Roman mythology was the ferryman of the underworld, the one who carried souls across the river Styx. This arena, Charon, he might carry a mallet or a red-hot poker, and he'd give you a tap on the head with the mallet, or a little prod with the hot iron. If you didn't react, well, you were probably dead enough for their purposes. It was a brutal, theatrical way of confirming death, and another little bit of show for anyone who might be watching this backstage horror. If you're still alive, but badly wounded, what happens then? Again, if you're a star, a champion, a valuable asset, there's a chance you'll get medical attention. A chance they'll try to save you. But if you're a nobody, an expendable, the calculation is cold, brutal, economic. Is it worth the cost of healing you? The food, the medical supplies, however crude, the time you'll be out of action, will you ever be fit to fight again, and fight well enough to be profitable? For most non-famous gladiators with serious injuries, the answer was probably no. You were damaged goods, a bad investment, cheaper to let you die and replace you with fresh meat from the ludus. So you might just be left there, lying on the cold, damp floor of the spoliarium, in a pile, with the other dead and dying, to bleed out, to go into shock, to succumb to your injuries, slowly, agonizingly. No comfort, no gentle hand, no soothing words, just the cold indifference of the attendants, the stench of death, the sounds of suffering. Imagine the terror, the despair, to be conscious but helpless, knowing this is where your life ends. Not in a blaze of glory on the arena sand, but in a dark, stinking, forgotten room, stripped of your dignity, your armor, your very humanity, waiting for the darkness to finally take you. The spoliarium, it was the dark underbelly of the glorious Roman games. The place where the bloody reality of the entertainment industry was laid bare, where broken bodies were processed, where assets were recovered, and where the vast majority of gladiators, the ones who didn't become legends, ended their short, brutal, and thoroughly miserable lives. Stripped, forgotten, another nameless victim of the arena's endless hunger. So, you're in the arena. You fought. You're wounded. Badly. You're down on one knee. Or maybe flat on your back, the taste of blood and sand in your mouth. Your opponent is standing over you, victorious, waiting for the signal. Is this it? Is this the absolute end? Maybe, probably. But occasionally, just occasionally, there was a sliver, a tiny, flickering, almost invisible chance of something other than immediate death. This chance was often symbolized by the concept of missio. Missio, it's a Latin word. It means release or dismissal, or, in this context, mercy. It didn't mean you were free to go home. Oh no, nothing that good. Missio simply meant you were spared death in this particular fight. You were allowed to live, to be patched up, to be sent back to the ludus, your gladiator school, and of course to fight another day, assuming you recovered, a temporary reprieve from the executioner's blade. How did it work? If a gladiator was defeated, wounded, unable to continue fighting, but perhaps he had fought bravely, or the crowd had taken a particular liking to him, or to his opponent, and wanted to see that star fighter again soon, not risk him in a fight to the death every time. The defeated gladiator could appeal for missio. Often this was done by dropping his shield and weapon, and raising one finger, usually the index finger, a silent, desperate plea. I surrender. Spare me, and then all eyes would turn, not to the victorious gladiator, not even to the defeated one cowering on the sand, but to the crowd, and ultimately to the editor. The editor was the giver of the games. The wealthy magistrate, or sometimes even the emperor himself, who was sponsoring the whole bloody spectacle. He had the final say. The crowd, they would make their feelings known, loudly. If they wanted the defeated gladiator spared, they might shout, "Midi, dismiss him, let him go." They might wave handkerchiefs or pieces of cloth. If they wanted him dead, well, the traditional image is of thumbs down. Pollice verso, as the Latin phrase goes, meaning with a turned thumb, though historians still debate exactly what the thumb gestures meant, up, down, or even hidden in the fist. But whatever the gesture, the crowd's desire for blood or for mercy was usually made very clear. They roared, they screamed, they stamped their feet. Imagine being that gladiator on the sand, lying there wounded, helpless, listening to thousands of people baying for your death, or much more rarely, for your life. The noise would be deafening, the suspense unbearable. The editor, he would usually gauge the mood of the crowd. He wanted to keep them happy after all. These games were often about political popularity as much as anything else. If the crowd overwhelmingly wanted mercy, he might grant missio. If they wanted blood, he'd probably give them blood. His signal, a gesture, would seal your fate for that day. But here's the kicker. For you, the tiro, the recruit, the unknown, the gale in the battered armor, who put up a clumsy, short fight, were you likely to get missio? Honestly, probably not. Why would they spare you? You weren't a star. You weren't a crowd favorite. You hadn't put on a particularly thrilling display of skill or courage. You were expendable. More often than not, if you were defeated, the signal would be for death. Your opponent would step forward and finish the job, quickly and efficiently. Missio, that was a privilege usually reserved for the more established, more valuable fighters. The ones the Lanista, your owner, and the editor actually wanted to see fight again. For you, it was mostly just a cruel, fleeting illusion of hope before the darkness closed in. And even if, by some miracle, you were granted missio, what did it mean? You were dragged back to the spoliarium, that charming stripping room we visited. If your wounds weren't too severe, you'd be patched up, crudely, painfully, and then sent back to the ludus, to recover and to star, training again, for the next fight, and the next, until your luck finally ran out. Missio wasn't freedom. It was just a stay of execution, a postponement of the inevitable. Now, what about true freedom? What about getting out of this hellish life altogether? That was symbolized by another Latin word, and another object. The rudis, rudis. The rudis was a simple wooden sword, or perhaps a wooden rod. It was the same kind of implement you might have trained with when you first entered the ludus. But if it was awarded to you by the editor in the arena, after a particularly distinguished career, or an exceptional display. It meant something entirely different. It meant freedom, libertas. It meant your oath, your sacramentum to the Lanista, was fulfilled or nullified. You were no longer a gladiator. You were a free man. You could walk out of the ludus, leave the arena behind, or so the story goes. The rudis, it was the ultimate dream for many gladiators, the symbol of survival, of achievement, of escape. But how often was it actually awarded, especially to someone like you? The non-famous, the average, extremely, vanishingly, rarely. Think about it. A Lanista, he had invested time and money, however little, in training you. Even a mediocre gladiator was still an asset. Someone he could rent out. Someone who might provide a return on investment. Why would he willingly free you? Especially if you were actually good enough to survive for a long time. A gladiator who was consistently winning, or at least putting on a good show and surviving, he was a moneymaker. The rudis was usually awarded only after many, many years of successful fighting, after numerous victories, after you had become a veteran, a crowd favorite, someone whose continued enslavement might even look bad for the Lanista or the editor. It was a reward for a long, distinguished, and highly profitable career. Most gladiators, the vast majority, the ones we're talking about, they didn't have long, distinguished careers. They had short, brutal, and usually fatal ones. They died long before they ever got within sniffing distance of a rudis. And even if, by some absolute miracle of the gods, you did get a rudis, you fought for years, you survived, you were granted your freedom. What then? What kind of freedom was it really? You were still infamous. Remember that lovely status, disgraced, shamed, an outcast, that legal and social stain. It didn't just wash off with freedom. You might struggle to find honest work, to be accepted back into normal society. Many ex-gladiators, the few who made it, often ended up staying connected to the world they knew. Maybe they became trainers, doctoras, in a ludus themselves, passing on the brutality. Maybe they worked as bodyguards for wealthy Romans. Their fighting skills still had some value. But a quiet, peaceful retirement on a little farm somewhere, that was probably a pipe dream. And you'd carry the scars, not just the physical ones, though those would be numerous and horrific. A mangled arm, a permanent limp, a missing eye, a body crisscrossed with the roadmap of old wounds. But the mental scars too. The nightmares, the trauma, the memories of all the men you had killed, all the friends you had seen die, the constant fear you had lived with for years. Could you ever truly be free from that? Could you ever really wash the blood off your hands or out of your mind? So, missio, mercy, it was usually just a temporary pass, a ticket to suffer another day. And the rudis, freedom, it was a beautiful, glittering prize, dangled just out of reach for almost everyone. An illusion of hope in a world that was, for most gladiators, almost entirely devoid of it. These weren't genuine get-out-of-jail-free cards for the average Joe in the arena. They were just another part of the psychological game. Another way to keep the system going. Another reason why it truly, truly sucked to be you. So, you're a gladiator. Or rather, you were a gladiator. You didn't get missio. You certainly didn't get the rudis, that wooden sword of freedom. Your luck, like that of so many thousands before you, simply ran out. Maybe it was in your first fight. Maybe your fifth. If you were incredibly, unusually tough or lucky for a nobody, maybe you even survived a dozen or so encounters. But the arena, it always claims its due. The house always wins, as they say. And in this case, the house was a bloodthirsty entertainment complex. Lifespans for gladiators, especially the non-famous ones, the ones who didn't have the skill or the luck or the Lannista's school owners' favor to get slightly better matchups or treatment. They were brutally short. We have some evidence from gladiator tombstones. For the ones who were remembered, the ones who did get a proper burial, and even for those more successful ones, they often died young, in their 20s, early 30s maybe. Remember, the average Roman man, if he survived childhood, live into his 40s. But gladiators, they were playing a lethal game with terrible odds. Some estimates suggest a gladiator had maybe a 1 in 5, or even a 1 in 10 chance of dying in any single combat, depending on the period and the type of fight. Fight 3 or 4 times a year, if you were that active. And those odds add up very, very quickly. Most simply did not survive long enough to retire. That was a pipe dream. So, you're dead. Your brief, brutal career is over. What happens to your body? You, the nameless Tiro recruit, the forgotten fighter, if you were a star, a champion, there's a chance, a slim one, that you might have belonged to something called a collegium. Collegium. This was a Roman club or association. Many trades had them. And sometimes gladiators formed their own collegia. These clubs often served as burial societies. So, if you were a member and you died, your comrades might ensure you got a proper burial. A funeral pyre to burn your body, as was common Roman custom. Your ashes collected. Maybe even a modest tombstone, a stele, with your name, your fighting record. A few sad words from your friends. Something to say, I was here. I existed. But for you, the non-famous gladiator, the one nobody really knew or cared about outside the grim walls of your ludus, were you likely to be in a collegium that could afford a decent burial plot? Probably not. Your Lanista, the school owner, he's already recovered his investment, your armor, your weapons, your body. That's just waste, a problem to be disposed of. He's certainly not going to pay for a fancy funeral for someone who didn't make him rich. So what was your fate? The libitinari, those arena undertakers we met in the spoliarium. They'd drag your corpse out, and then, if you were lucky, your body might be claimed by your ludus and dumped into a common burial pit. Many Roman cities had these. Pudiculi, they were sometimes called. Mass graves, essentially big holes in the ground outside the city walls, where the bodies of the poor, the enslaved, the disgraced, and the unknown were unceremoniously thrown. No individual markers, no ceremony, just lime thrown over the bodies to try and keep the stench down and hurry decomposition. You'd end up jumbled in with hundreds, maybe thousands of other unfortunate souls, anonymous in death, just as you were largely anonymous in life. And if you were particularly unlucky, if you were a condemned criminal who died in the arena, for example, someone deemed truly noxious, harmful, and vile, you might not even get that. Your body might be denied any form of proper burial at all. In Roman belief, a proper burial was incredibly important for the peace of the soul in the afterlife. To be denied burial, that was a terrible final curse. Your corpse might simply be dragged out of the city and left in some desolate spot, for the wild dogs, for the carrion birds, to rot under the sun. A final hideous indignity, a public state, meant that your life and your death meant absolutely nothing. No legacy, no memory. No one to mourn you, except perhaps a few equally wretched comrades back in the ludus who knew their own time was probably coming soon. Your suffering, your fear, your brief, brutal existence, it would vanish, as if you had never been, swallowed by the insatiable hunger of the arena, and forgotten by a world that only cared about the blood and the spectacle, not the human cost. That was the most common reward for the non-famous gladiator. An unmarked grave, or no grave at all. The ultimate sucky end to a thoroughly sucky life. So, there you have it. We've walked as best we can through the fleeting brutal life of the average Roman gladiator. The one whose name nobody bothered to carve into stone. The one whose face is lost to history, just one among countless thousands swallowed by the dust of ages. It wasn't a life of celebrated glory, was it? It wasn't heroic duels in gleaming armor, followed by the roar of an adoring crowd and the laurel wreath of victory. Not for most, not for the 99%. For them, it was a life relentlessly defined by fear. The gnawing fear of the Lanista, the school owner, and his brutal doctoras, the trainers, who held the power of pain and petty tyranny. The fear of the whips, the chains, the starvation rations that barely kept body and soul together. The ever-present fear of that stinking cramped cell in the ludus, a stone coffin for the living, and overarching all of it, the primal fear of the arena itself, that vast, terrifying bowl of screaming faces all unified in their demand for blood. Your blood. It was a life steeped in constant grinding pain, the dull ache of old wounds that never truly healed, the sharp, fresh sting of new ones, inflicted daily in the name of training. The burning, screaming muscles from endless repetitive drills with overweight, crude weapons, the gnawing hunger from a diet of barley mush and ash, weight, or a mockery of sustenance. The sickness that spread like an invisible plague through the filthy, overcrowded conditions of their barracks. It was a life of profound soul-crushing degradation, stripped of your name, your past, your identity, robbed of your freedom, your autonomy, your basic human dignity, treated as less than an animal, a piece of breathing property, an expendable commodity in a brutal trade, your body not your own to command, your life not your own to live, your death not even that was truly yours. It belonged to the crowd. It was merely the final act in their grisly entertainment. We saw the grim pathways to this existence. Dragged from a conquered homeland as a prisoner of war, your life and liberty stolen by the legions. Condemned by a Roman court as a criminal, damnati ad ludos, sentenced to die for the amusement of the masses. Or perhaps driven by a desperation we can barely imagine, you volunteered as an octoratus, selling yourself into this living hell, swearing that terrible oath to endure burning bondage, beatings, and ultimately, death by the sword. We lived in our minds, through the daily grind of the ludus. The brutal awakening before dawn, the mockery of hygiene, the monotonous, disgusting food that filled the belly but starved the spirit. The relentless, mind-numbing, spirit-breaking training designed to turn a man into a killing machine, or kill him in the attempt. The constant threat of arbitrary punishment, the absolute suffocating lack of hope. We then stepped onto the blood-soaked sands of the arena, not as a revered champion, but as nameless fodder, pushed out into that deafening, inhuman roar, perhaps armed with faulty second-hand gear, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs, your mind a blur of pure terror, to face a quick, brutal, and utterly uncelebrated end. Or, if wounded, to be dragged off unceremoniously to the spoliarium, that grim stripping room, that antechamber of death where assets were recovered and broken bodies were discarded. We acknowledged how the glimmers of hope, missio, the slim chance of mercy from a single savage fight, or the rudes, that mythical wooden sword of freedom, how they were for most just cruel illusions, distant stars in an endless night, almost never granted to the average unknown fighter whose life was cheaper than the sand that soaked up his blood. Your most likely reward for all this suffering? An unmarked grave, or no grave at all. Your body dumped in a common pit with the city's refuse forgotten by all. Your pain unrecorded, your name lost to the winds, as if you had never been. The sheer scale of this forgotten suffering, it's difficult to truly comprehend. For centuries, across the vast Roman Empire, from the misty shores of Britain to the scorching deserts of Syria, from the forests of Gaul to the plains of Hispania, arenas stood, and they were filled, and in those arenas countless thousands upon thousands of men, and sometimes women too, fought, bled, and died. Most of them, just like the gladiator whose brief, terrible life we've imagined tonight. Nameless, faceless, voiceless in history. The myth of the noble gladiator, the heroic warrior of the arena, the Russell Crowe figure. It's a powerful one, a seductive one. It's been endlessly romanticized in art, in literature, in epic films. And yes, there were a few who achieved a measure of fame. A few whose skill, whose courage, or whose sheer dumb luck allowed them to survive, even to find a strange kind of respect in that brutal, unforgiving world. But their stories, they are the tiny, glittering exceptions that prove a vast, dark rule. They are not the norm. The norm was misery. The norm was fear. The norm was a short, brutal life, and an anonymous, unmourned death. So why do we delve into this? Why remember such a grim, depressing chapter of the human story? Perhaps because it's vital to remember the forgotten. To understand that beneath the grand marble monument, T.S. and the epic, triumphal histories of empires like Rome, there lies the immense, unrecorded collective suffering of ordinary anonymous people. People whose lives were deemed worthless by those in power, whose pain was considered a perfectly acceptable form of public entertainment. It's a stark, chilling reminder of what can happen when spectacle is allowed to overshadow basic humanity, when the thirst for violent entertainment becomes so ingrained, so powerful, that an entire system and industry is built to provide it, fueled by an endless, disposable supply of human lives. The echo of those forgotten gladiators, it's faint now, almost silent after 2 millennia, buried under the ruins of amphitheaters, and the even deeper layers of historical indifference. But if you listen very carefully, perhaps in the quiet of a late night like this one, you can almost hear it. The distant clank of chains in a dark, cold cell, the rhythmic, desperate thud of a wooden sword against a training post, the ragged, gasping breath of a terrified man facing his end on the hot arena sand. The silent scream of a life that mattered, even if no one at the time bothered to acknowledge it, even if no one today remembers their individual names. They were there, and they suffered, and in their silent collective ordeal, in their unwritten histories, lies a profound and deeply uncomfortable truth. A truth about the human cost of spectacle, about the terrifying ease with which lives can be deemed expendable, their suffering repackaged as amusement. Their truest legacy isn't found in monuments or heroic tales. Those belong to the victors, the powerful, the remembered. No, their legacy for us is in the chilling echo of their mass absence from those glorious histories. It's a stark reminder even now, whispering across the centuries, that every single life, however humble, however broken, however systematically forgotten by history, matters, and in its own way it demands to be remembered, not for glory it never knew, but for its simple, undeniable, and so often tragically violated humanity.